Have you ever asked yourself why systems built to serve people seem designed to keep them small? Why so many lives begin with potential but end in quiet resignation? Because that's the point. The world runs better, smoother, more predictably when most people stay powerless, not dead, not imprisoned, just dulled, softened by comfort, distracted by routine, and drained of the energy required to fight back. Powerlessness isn't always forced on you. Often it's offered wrapped in the language of safety, responsibility, or even kindness. Take education. It pretends to be about empowerment. But watch what it really does. It rewards obedience over creativity, repetition over curiosity. You're taught how to answer questions, not ask them. How to fit in, not stand out. By the time you finish, you're not trained to think critically. You're trained to follow instructions. Because critical thinkers don't make good employees. And employment. It's not about enabling your purpose. It's about survival. Your energy is spent producing for someone else's profit. You trade the majority of your waking life for a salary that just barely covers your needs. And even when you succeed, get the raise, climb the ladder, it's just a longer leash. Prestige replaces freedom. Status masks submission. And you smile through it all because you're taught, because gratitude is weaponized. You should be thankful to have a job, thankful to be exhausted, thankful to be replaceable. This isn't just economic, it's psychological. Powerlessness is internalized. You start believing your ideas don't matter, that your voice is too small, that the system is too big. So you shrink, you adapt, you play by rules you never agreed to, because fighting them feels pointless. And when you do protest, when you resist, watch how quickly the world reminds you of your place. You're called irrational, emotional, dangerous. Suddenly, your defiance isn't seen as brave, it's seen as a threat, because it is. A single person regaining their power disrupts the illusion. And illusions are everything. The illusion that democracy means equality, that opportunity is equal, that freedom is universal. These stories keep the powerless from revolting. They're not meant to reflect reality. They're meant to pacify. And comfort is the strongest pacifier of all. You don't have to be chained when you're comfortable. You just have to be entertained, numbed, and kept just content enough to forget what you've lost. Real control doesn't look like oppression. It looks like convenience. Subscriptions, seamless UX, predictable paychecks. It looks like luxury with a ceiling you're not allowed to touch. Even your dreams get co-opted. You're told to hustle, to build your brand, to become the best version of yourself, so long as that version remains productive, palatable, and non-threatening. The powerful aren't afraid of chaos. They're afraid of clarity. They're afraid you'll see how power is hoarded, how justice is conditional, how systems exist not to uplift but to extract. And so the game continues. You vote, you work, you strive, but only within the bounds allowed, the rest off limits. Too radical, too idealistic, too much. You learn to censor yourself, not because you're told to, but because you've learned what happens when you don't. That's the ultimate trick. To make people complicit in their own disempowerment. To build a world where resistance feels not just dangerous, but impolite. Where questioning the structure makes you the problem. So ask yourself, what would it take for you to feel powerful again? Not in a fantasy, but in reality. What would it look like to reclaim the parts of yourself that were slowly, systematically stripped away? Because here's the truth. The world doesn't want you to know. The system doesn't need everyone to be powerless. It just needs most people to believe they are. Freedom has always been the word they dangle in front of you when they want you to stop asking questions. It's seductive, clean, empowering, pure. The very idea of it triggers something deep in your psyche, a sense of autonomy, control, possibility. And yet, for all its symbolic weight, freedom has never been about setting you loose. It's been about teaching you to police your own chains. Because real freedom, the kind that threatens systems, disrupts hierarchies, and destabilizes order, is dangerous. It's unpredictable. So instead, you're given a safer version, a replica, a freedom defined not by your power to act, but by the boundaries you're told not to cross. You're told you're free to speak, just not too loudly. You're free to protest, just not too disruptively. You're free to vote between choices that were already chosen for you. And here's the catch. The more you believe you're free, the less you notice how controlled you actually are. Take the workplace. You're free to choose your job. But nearly every job is built to extract as much energy from you as possible, while giving back just enough to keep you coming back. You're free to quit. Sure, but you're not free from rent, from bills, from the creeping fear of what happens when the paycheck stops. So your freedom becomes a leash. You can roam, just never too far. Or think about technology. The internet promised limitless information, unlimited voices, but algorithms decide what you see. They filter your world, shape your reality, and feed you what keeps you clicking, not what sets you free. You're free to browse, but only within a garden walled off by code and commercial interests. Even your identity is curated for you. You're encouraged to be yourself, but only in ways that are legible, profitable, marketable. Every act of self-expression runs through a gauntlet of social validation. Likes, shares, approval. Your freedom of identity is real, but only as long as it doesn't disrupt the machinery built to profit from it. And still, you believe you're free. Because the illusion is so well crafted, so deeply embedded, that challenging it feels like madness. But here's the truly insidious part. Freedom, as it's sold to you, isn't just a lie, it's a mirror. One that makes you think you're in control while quietly reflecting back the constraints you've accepted. It shifts the burden of control from the system to the self. If you're not happy, if you're not successful, it's your fault because you were free to choose otherwise. This is how control evolves, no longer enforced through violence or surveillance, but through consent. You become your own warden. You manage your own chains. And you call that freedom. Now step back. Ask yourself, what would real freedom even look like? Would it feel comfortable, or would it feel like chaos? Would it be easy, or would it demand everything? Because true freedom, raw, untamed freedom, doesn't feel like peace. It feels like risk, like uncertainty, like stepping off a ledge without knowing what's below. That kind of freedom can't be granted. It can only be taken, and that makes it dangerous. That makes it uncontrollable. Which is why systems of power have always learned to weaponize the idea of freedom, not to give it, but to manage its threat. They wrap control in its language, its imagery, its rituals. They let you believe you're free, so long as your definition of freedom never threatens theirs. It's not a conspiracy, it's not a trick, it's just the way power sustains itself. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth of all. That freedom was never meant to liberate you. It was meant to keep you in line. That the promise of freedom isn't a path to autonomy. It's a tool to ensure you never seek more than what you're allowed to have. Because if you truly understood what freedom demands, what it costs, what it disrupts, you might stop chasing the version they've given you and start reclaiming the one they fear. You know the truth already. You just don't want to say it out loud. Some lives are valued more than others. Not because they're more deserving, not because they've done more good or caused less harm, but because we've silently, collectively agreed to let them be. Because the machinery of society, law, and culture is built to protect certain lives and to forget others. Ask yourself, who gets saved first when the floodwaters rise? Who gets evacuated, treated, rescued? Who makes the headlines and who disappears without mention? You already know the answer. In the quiet calculus of value, lives are not measured equally. They're ranked, sorted, prioritized. And the worst part? It doesn't take a dictator or a tyrant to do this. It only takes us. Ordinary people, looking away at the right time, staying quiet when it counts most, convincing ourselves that the injustice is too distant to challenge. Because distance is everything. It's easy to care about those close to you. It's easy to mourn the life that mirrors your own. But what about the lives that don't? The poor, the incarcerated, the foreign, the inconvenient. Their pain doesn't look like yours, so it's easier to ignore, to discount, to devalue. This is how the system survives, by teaching you who to empathize with and who to forget. Look at the way media reports tragedy. A wealthy missing woman becomes a national crisis. A refugee child dies in silence. One story gets 24-hour coverage, the other doesn't get a name. That's not an accident. That's programming. It trains you subtly, powerfully to care selectively, to see some suffering as a tragedy and others as statistics. It teaches you that some lives are more relatable, more worthy, more human, and you internalize that. You replicate it. Every time you scroll past another headline, every time you justify your inaction, you are unconsciously participating in the architecture of inequality. But let's go deeper. Think about the justice system. Who gets prison time and who gets a settlement? Who's presumed innocent and who's treated like a threat before they even speak? Race, wealth, status. These are the real variables in the equation of justice. Not guilt, not innocence, just the quiet math of power. And when justice becomes a privilege instead of a principle, life itself becomes conditional. If you meet the right criteria, if you look right, talk right, live right, you are protected, you are mourned, you are remembered. If not, you vanish. And when people vanish, so does accountability. Because no one demands justice for someone they've never seen, never heard, never cared about. If a person disappears and no one notices, did their life ever really count? This isn't just about institutions. It's about how we see each other. It's about the internal scale we all carry, the invisible ledger that guides our empathy. It shows up in hospitals where uninsured patients get less care, in schools where underfunded districts churn out forgotten children, in cities where police protection depends on your zip code. These aren't anomalies, they're features. The system isn't broken. It's precise, intentional, efficient, and it feeds off your silence. Because when you stay quiet, when you accept that this is just the way it is, when you say it's not my problem, you validate it. You give it oxygen. You keep the hierarchy intact. But here's the hardest truth. Sometimes the reason certain lives are valued more is because it's easier that way. It's easier to grieve selectively, to care about one person instead of thousands, to pretend that worth is earned, not inherited. It's comforting to believe the world is fair, that bad things only happen to bad people, that there's a logic to the cruelty. But there isn't. There's just a story we tell ourselves to keep the chaos at bay. And when we tell that story enough times, it becomes policy, it becomes law, it becomes culture, and then it becomes truth. So what happens when we stop telling it? What happens when we refuse to accept that some lives matter more? Everything starts to unravel. The systems lose their camouflage. The hierarchy begins to crack. And beneath it all, we start to see something terrifying and liberating at the same time. That all of this, every inequality, every injustice, is a choice, not an accident. A choice, and if it's a choice, then it can be unmade, but not without cost, not without discomfort, not without sacrifice. Because unlearning who we've decided matters most means confronting who we've allowed to be invisible. It means reckoning with the people we've lost, the voices we've ignored, the lives we let disappear. It means realizing that the value of a life isn't something we find, it's something we create. And we've created it all wrong. Have you ever noticed that people are far more moral when they're being watched? Not when they think about what's right, not when they talk about ethics, but when the consequences feel immediate, when fear tightens its grip. That's when morality suddenly matters most. We like to believe that empathy guides us, that our capacity to feel others' pain, to imagine their suffering, is what keeps society from collapsing into chaos. But if that were true, we'd live in a very different world. A world where compassion didn't vanish the moment no one was looking, where decency wasn't so conveniently abandoned when inconvenient. Here's a truth most won't admit. Fear does what empathy cannot. It controls, fear enforces boundaries, empathy suggests them. Think about how children behave, not when their parents are around, but when they're left alone. What keeps them in line isn't their tender hearts, it's the fear of being caught, of being punished. The same principle governs adults. Office behavior shifts when the manager walks in. People become more honest, more polite, more careful, because now there's risk. Fear gives it teeth. Now consider the criminal justice system. Prisons, laws, surveillance, all rooted not in empathy but deterrence. Society doesn't prevent theft with public compassion campaigns. It prevents it with the threat of consequence. We don't teach people not to murder through emotional appeals. We rely on fear, fear of punishment, of exile, of death. Empathy might make you pause. Fear makes you stop. The irony? The more we romanticize empathy, the more we hide how much we depend on fear to maintain order. Even religion, long seen as the moral bedrock of civilization, relies on this mechanism. Heaven may be the reward, but hell is the threat. Eternal damnation isn't about love, it's about fear weaponized for moral compliance. Not do good because it's right, but do good or suffer. It's morality with a knife to your throat. And it works because fear is immediate, visceral. It bypasses rationalization. You can argue with empathy. You can ignore it, suppress it, dismiss it as weakness. But fear grips the nervous system, hijacks the mind, floods the body. It leaves no room for moral negotiation. It commands. And what about when people do the right thing anonymously? Isn't that empathy? Sometimes, yes. But more often, it's reputation management. We fear how we might feel if we don't act. Guilt is still a kind of fear, a fear of self-judgment, of internal decay. Even in private, we are rarely free from the invisible eyes we've internalized. We don't need to be watched. We've learned to watch ourselves. Surveillance has simply made that easier. Your phone tracks your location. Cameras dot every street. Your online activity is monitored, analyzed, stored. This isn't paranoia, it's infrastructure. We live inside a panopticon, where the possibility of being observed keeps most people in check. And what's terrifying is that it works. Fear of being watched creates a more obedient population than empathy ever could. Empathy is fragile. It's biased. You care more about those who look like you, think like you, live like you. You care less as distance grows, as faces blur into statistics. But fear doesn't discriminate. It treats everyone equally. It ensures behavior where compassion fails. And that's why it's so effective. The strongest morality is not rooted in love or understanding or shared humanity. It's born from the dark knowledge that actions have consequences, that something will be lost, that pain will follow. The strongest morality is forged in fire, not light. It sounds bleak, but perhaps it's just honest. Because when you peel away the comfort of moral fables, you're left with this: most people don't avoid wrongdoing because they're good. They avoid it because they're afraid. Afraid of loss, of judgment, of punishment, of themselves. And maybe that's enough. Maybe fear is the glue that holds our fragile civilization together. Not because it inspires us, but because it terrifies us into civility. Not because it uplifts us, but because it stops us from falling. You may not like that idea, but you know it's true. You don't crave the truth. You crave something that feels true. That sounds true. That comforts you like. Truth used to, back when you were too young to know what truth even was. And that's the trick, isn't it? Your brain isn't wired to seek reality. It's wired to seek relief, because truth is heavy. It scrapes against your certainties, rattles your beliefs, shatters the neat little myths you've arranged your identity around. Comfort, on the other hand, is easy, smooth, seductive. It tells you you're good enough, that the world is just, that everything is going to be okay, even when it's not. Especially when it's not. It starts young. You're told the world is fair, that good things happen to good people, that justice is blind and hard work always pays off. These aren't truths. These are tranquilizers. Cognitive lullabies meant to ease your anxiety, so you'll stop asking dangerous questions. Then you believe them. Not because they're accurate, but because they make life bearable. Comfort doesn't just feel better than truth. It feels truer than truth. When someone tells you something you want to believe about yourself, your country, your faith, you nod before you question, because it fits. It slips right into the grooves your mind has already carved out. Discomfort, on the other hand, feels like friction. Resistance. Your brain equates that resistance with wrongness, not realizing it's just the unfamiliar weight of reality pressing down. And in a world built on illusion, truth is the enemy of peace. So you lie to yourself. You tell yourself you're happy in that job, that your relationship isn't suffocating, that you're doing the best you can, because facing the truth would require change. Sacrifice, pain. It would mean pulling the thread that unravels everything. So you don't, you let comfort win, and society thanks you for it. The system needs you lulled, needs you pacified. It hands you just enough ease, entertainment, consumerism, surface-level stability to keep you from revolting. The goal isn't to oppress you violently, it's to seduce you into submission, to make the illusion of control feel so safe, so cozy, you never notice the cage you're in. And if you do start noticing, it's your fault. You're labeled negative, cynical, ungrateful. People don't want the truth from you. They want reassurance. They want validation. Say something comforting, and you're applauded. Say something true, and you're punished. Even your brain turns against you. Neurologically, comfort is rewarded. Discomfort is punished. Truth triggers cortisol, anxiety, dread. Lies, sweet, self-affirming lies, trigger dopamine. You are quite literally addicted to self-deception. And so, day by day, you build a life on stories that feel right instead of facts that are right. You scroll through curated lives online, pretending you don't notice how hollow yours feels. You echo opinions you barely understand because they signal belonging. You accept systems you know are corrupt because questioning them makes you feel powerless. You don't want the truth, You want the illusion that you're already living it. This is why people cling to myths, why conspiracy theories flourish, why cults recruit with love bombing instead of logic. The truth is slow and painful. Research is slow and painful. Lies are fast and soothing. One eases your pain, the other amplifies it. So which would you choose? Now here's the twist. Comfort that feels true is the most dangerous kind of lie, because it doesn't just distort reality, it replaces it. You stop noticing the cracks in your worldview. You lose the ability to detect contradiction. The lies start living inside you, shaping your identity, your values, your sense of what's even possible. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to find your way back. This is why revolutions fail, why whistleblowers are silenced, why most people, when given the choice between waking up and staying asleep, slam the snooze button on their own awakening. Truth is a burden, comfort is a sedative, and most of us prefer to be sedated. So no, you don't really want the truth. Not in its full, unfiltered form. You want a version of it. One that confirms your biases, that doesn't make you question your reflection, that allows you to keep walking in the same direction without ever wondering where the road actually leads. But here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. That preference, that addiction to comfort, is the very thing that keeps you from becoming free. Because comfort will lie to you. But the truth never will. You're told that struggle builds character, that adversity shapes resilience, that pain has a purpose. But what if the real reason you're always struggling isn't personal growth, but profit? Not your profit, the system's. Let's start with something you feel every day, but rarely question: pressure. Financial pressure, social pressure, emotional pressure. It comes in waves, relentless, inescapable. Rent is due, deadlines pile up. You're behind, always behind. And just when you feel like you're catching up, the rules change. This isn't a bug, it's the design, because a struggling individual is a productive one. Not in terms of creativity or autonomy, but in terms of output, labor, compliance, predictability. When you're barely holding things together, you don't ask dangerous questions. You don't have time to think. You're too busy surviving to notice the walls closing in. This is how the system prefers you, not destroyed but distracted, not broken but busy, struggling, not enough to collapse, just enough to comply. And there's a dark genius to it. See, struggle creates dependency. When life feels unstable, you cling to anything that feels secure. Your job, your routine, your paycheck, no matter how soul-crushing. You trade freedom for consistency. You sacrifice dreams for stability. You lower your expectations, not because you want to, but because the alternative feels too risky. It's not just economics. It's emotional, psychological. You're made to believe that your inability to thrive is your fault, that you're lazy, that you're not working hard enough. But the truth is, you're operating inside a machine that's designed to keep you in a state of constant deficit. You're not failing. The system is succeeding. It's succeeding by making your exhaustion look like virtue. You're praised for hustling, for grinding, for pushing through burnout. But who benefits when you sacrifice your health for productivity? When you accept unpaid overtime as loyalty? When you wear your fatigue like a badge of honor? Not you. This narrative, the glorification of struggle, is sold to you as a moral value, that there's dignity in the grind, that your suffering means you're strong. But suffering alone doesn't make you stronger. It makes you manageable. The more you struggle, the more you consume. Quick comforts, instant relief, fast food, streaming services, retail therapy. You're too tired for anything else. And every moment you reach for something to soothe the ache, someone profits. Struggle becomes a subscription, a renewable resource, and the irony, you'll defend the very system that keeps you under. Because you've internalized the lie that your suffering is noble, that it's preparing you for something better, that someday it will pay off. But what if it won't? What if the system needs you to believe in that future just long enough to keep you moving? Like a carrot dangling just out of reach, promising freedom while chaining you to perpetual motion. Even education plays a role. You're told that schooling is your path out of struggle, but what it often delivers is debt, conformity, and a sanitized idea of success. You're shaped into a worker, not a thinker, trained to serve a market, not challenge it. And when you finally ask, why am I still struggling? The system offers a new solution: more effort, more hustle, more compliance. As if the answer to a rigged game is to play harder. You're not crazy for feeling this way, you're perceptive. Struggle is sold to you as transformation, but it's exploitation in disguise, because when you're on the edge, just barely making it, you're not a threat, you're not a rebel, you're not awake, you're too tired to resist. And that's the point, you're more useful to the system when you're struggling. Not because it cares about your growth, but because your struggle is predictable, profitable, safe. So what do? First, stop blaming yourself. You're not weak, you're not broken. You're responding exactly as anyone would in a world designed to drain you. Then get quiet, get still, pay attention to your energy, your patterns, your triggers. Ask the questions the system doesn't want you to ask. Why is this normal? Who benefits from my struggle? And most importantly, what would my life look like if I wasn't just surviving? Because your liberation begins the moment you realize that your suffering is not sacred. It's manufactured, and you don't owe it to anyone. Imagine a world with no villains, no monsters, no one to point at and say, there, that's the problem. Now imagine trying to feel righteous in that world, to feel good, to feel justified. You can't, because righteousness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs contrast. It needs shadows. It needs someone to blame. This is the hidden architecture of morality. It's not just built on ethics or values. It's built on enemies, on opposition, on narratives that divide the world into good and evil, right and wrong, us and them. Without the them, the us loses all definition. Think about it. Every society has its chosen villains: the criminal, the addict, the corrupt, the deviant. And if one villain disappears, another quickly takes its place. Why? Because society doesn't just need order, it needs a sense of superiority, a mirror that reflects back its own virtue by contrasting it against depravity. Villains are convenient. They carry our darkest traits, so we don't have to. We can project onto them everything we fear in ourselves: cruelty, greed, lust, weakness. They become scapegoats for internal battles we're too scared to confront. And once we label someone a villain, we no longer have to listen to them, understand them, humanize them. That label becomes a moral gag order. Righteousness, then, isn't about being good. It's about being better, better than someone else. And the easiest way to feel better defines someone else as worse. History shows us how this works. Witch hunts, moral panics, public executions. They weren't just punishments, they were rituals, opportunities for the crowd to bond over shared condemnation, to feel unified, not by love, but by judgment. And judgment feels good. It's addictive. It simplifies a complex world. It replaces nuance with certainty. But here's the twist. The line between hero and villain is paper thin. One shift in perspective, one change in circumstance, and the roles reverse. The revolutionary becomes the terrorist. The whistleblower becomes the traitor. The outcast becomes the prophet. If only they survive long enough. Yet society rarely acknowledges this fluidity. It prefers static roles, fixed villains, because change threatens the righteousness it clings to. If today's monster can become tomorrow's martyr, then our certainty starts to crack. Our moral high ground begins to sink. And so, villains are preserved, sometimes even manufactured. Their stories are flattened, stripped of context, exaggerated for effect. We cherry-pick their worst moments, ignore their humanity, and reduce them to symbols. Because symbols are easier to hate, easier to rally against, easier to use. This isn't just abstract. You see it everywhere, in politics, in media, in the way headlines are written and enemies are framed. A complex individual becomes the threat. A group becomes the problem. And suddenly, you're righteous again. You're safe. You're on the right side. But that safety is a lie. Because the more we define ourselves by opposition, the more we rely on enemies to feel whole. And what happens when no one is left to villainize? We turn on each other, or worse, on ourselves. So here's the question. Who benefits from this cycle? Who gains when society defines itself by who it condemns? The answer is simple. Those in power. Righteousness distracts from corruption. Villains distract from injustice. If you're focused on hating the right people, you're too busy to notice the system pulling the strings. This is why every time a villain falls, a new one rises. The system needs them. Because without villains, righteousness fades. And without righteousness, the illusion of moral order collapses. But maybe that collapse is necessary. Maybe the truth lies in the grey. In the uncomfortable space where everyone is flawed and no one is purely good. Maybe real morality isn't about feeling righteous. It's about being honest. About admitting our own capacity for harm. Our own blind spots. Our own need to judge. Because until we do, we'll keep creating villains. Not because they exist, but because we need them to. To feel clean. To feel justified. To feel like the heroes of our own story. Even if we never were. Imagine a building burning, not a home, not a school, but a courthouse. The structure is engulfed in flames, paperwork curling into ash, gavel cracking from heat, flags withering. But inside, one person, trapped, screaming for help. And now ask yourself this, if you had to choose between saving that person or saving the institution, what would you do? You already know the answer. And yet, society doesn't. Because we don't protect people. We protect systems, titles, procedures, buildings, uniforms, badges. We protect the symbols of order more than the lives that order is supposed to serve. Look at the headlines. The whistleblower reveals mass corruption, fraud, or abuse. What happens next? They're discredited, fired, erased. Not because they were wrong, but because they threatened the image of the institution. Truth is sacrificed, so the illusion of integrity remains intact. Police brutality, investigated internally. Government misconduct, redacted and buried. Why? Because acknowledging flaws means admitting the institution is fallible, and that terrifies those in power. So they build walls of silence, shields of protocol, excuses wrapped in policy, anything to preserve the appearance of legitimacy. The logic is simple. People are replaceable. Institutions are eternal, or so we're told. But what is an institution if not a collection of people? That's the paradox. When one person suffers, they're labeled unfortunate. But if the institution is criticized, it's a crisis. One life is negligible. A threat to the system, though. That's war. Think about how justice is enforced. Victims are told to wait, to follow procedure, to stay quiet, respectful, patient. Not because it's effective, but because speaking out might destabilize the process. The system matters more than the suffering. Order over outcome, ritual over relief. And it's not just the courts, it's corporations, churches, universities. A teacher exposes abuse, protect the school's reputation. If an employee reports harassment, HR protects the brand. Institutions aren't designed to seek truth. They're designed to survive. Because institutional survival isn't about people. It's about power. Power doesn't apologize. Power doesn't self-correct unless forced. It masks itself as fairness, due process, professionalism. But peel back the layers and you'll see it clearly. Preservation, at any cost. Even in war, soldiers are sacrificed for strategic advantage. Civilians are labeled collateral damage. The value of human life bends under the weight of military objectives. And when mistakes are made, bombed hospitals, wrong targets, intelligence failures, the first concern isn't the dead. It's the narrative, the image. The institution must remain pure, or at least appear to be. This isn't dysfunction, it's design. We raise children to trust systems. Courts will protect you, police will serve you, governments will hear you. But when harm comes and the institution is implicated, those same systems shut their doors. Deny, delay, deflect. Not because they don't know how to respond, but because responding truthfully threatens their survival. Even media plays the game. Scandals are spun, language softened. An abuse isn't called abuse, it's misconduct. A killing isn't murder, it's a tragic mistake. The goal isn't clarity, it's containment. Don't disturb the institution. Don't shake the public's faith. But faith built on silence is fragility, masked as strength. And when someone finally screams, when they risk everything to expose the rot, they're vilified. Traitors, liars, threats. Because in this world, protecting the institution means punishing the truth. Loyalty is prized more than honesty, compliance more than courage. And yet here's the irony: people want to believe. They crave the stability institutions promise. But every time the truth is buried, trust erodes, not instantly, but quietly. Like a foundation slowly cracking beneath the weight of its own hypocrisy. Eventually, even the most sacred institutions fall, not because of their critics, but because of their refusal to change. So maybe the real question isn't why we protect institutions more than people. Maybe the question is, what would happen if we stopped? If we placed human dignity above hierarchy, truth above tradition, transparency above preservation. We say systems are for the people. But every time a person is sacrificed to preserve a system, we prove otherwise. And until we reverse that equation, until people matter more than the logos on the wall, we'll keep watching the same pattern unfold. Burning buildings, and no one saving the person inside. He walks into the room, smiling. Confident, charming. The crowd leans in. Laughter spills. Applause follows. And in that moment, nobody remembers what he did. They remember how he made them feel. We forgive power when it smiles. It's not justice. It's not redemption. It's emotional sleight of hand. Think about it. A scandal breaks. Abuse, corruption, betrayal. But give it time. Let the right PR team craft the right message. Let the accused shed a few tears, appear on the right talk show, flash that disarming smile. The tone softens. The outrage fades. A new narrative emerges. He's only human. He's learned his lesson. At least he's trying. Power doesn't beg for forgiveness. It seduces it. We want to believe in the redemption arc. We want the powerful to be kind, relatable, flawed in just the right ways. When a tyrant cracks a joke, when a war criminal holds a baby, when a billionaire cries on camera, we feel something, and that feeling blinds us. Because smiles short-circuit scrutiny. They bypass our logic and go straight to our gut. We mistake charm for change. We confuse likability with goodness. And the most dangerous part, we don't even realize it's happening. We call it charisma, but charisma is just camouflage. It's the weapon power uses to deflect consequence. A distraction wrapped in warmth. A performance of humility, carefully measured and precisely timed. Not because they regret, but because they know what you need to see to stop holding them accountable. And we oblige. Again and again. We forgive power, not when it's just, not when it's accountable, not when it changes, but when it performs the right emotions. This isn't new. Think of monarchs waving from balconies, dictators kissing babies, CEOs apologizing in soft tones, politicians rolling up their sleeves and pretending to serve soup. The optics are always the same. Look, I'm one of you, but they're not. And they never were. The performance of remorse becomes more important than the substance of reform. And here's the darkest part. Smiling power is easier to live with. It doesn't make us uncomfortable. It doesn't demand hard questions. It lets us maintain our illusion of a fair world without facing the cruelty it conceals. Because if the guilty seem kind, maybe the system isn't broken. Maybe the world isn't cruel. Maybe we're not complicit. But we are. And we're not just forgiving them. We're protecting ourselves from the discomfort of the truth. That truth? Smiling power doesn't change. It adapts. It evolves. It learns what works. It learns that accountability is optional, as long as the performance is convincing. So the abuser becomes a motivational speaker. The tyrant reinvents as a misunderstood patriot. The fraudster starts a podcast. And we, the audience, applaud the transformation. Not because they earned it, but because we're tired. Tired of anger. Tired of outrage. Tired of caring. And that's exactly what power waits for. Apathy. Exhaustion. The moment when a smile feels better than justice. We're not forgiving them. We're surrendering to them. Smiling back, nodding along, telling ourselves it's fine now. He said sorry, she cried. They're different, but they're not. They're just smiling. And we're just falling for it. Again and again and again. Because we don't want the truth. We want comfort. We don't want justice. We want closure. And if power can give us that, packaged in charm, wrapped in redemption, we'll trade our outrage for it every time. Until smiling becomes immunity. Until charm becomes the currency of forgiveness. And until power learns definitively that it never has to change, only perform. Progress sounds like a noble word. It's painted in optimism, skyscrapers, space travel, medical miracles, technological wonders. But look closely, peel back the polished surface. What you'll find is a truth no one likes to admit. Most progress depends on someone being exploited. It's easy to marvel at the convenience of your smartphone. Sleek, powerful, always within reach. But have you thought about where it comes from? Who mined the cobalt for its battery? Who stitched together its components in silent factories halfway around the world? The answer is almost always the same. Someone poor, someone invisible, someone paid just enough to survive, but never enough to escape. This isn't an accident. It's the model. Exploitation isn't the cost of progress, it's the engine. And the more comfortable your life becomes, the more likely it is that someone else's discomfort has been maximized to make it happen. Modern economies reward speed, scale, and efficiency. But behind every bargain, behind every next-day delivery, there's a chain of human sacrifice. The gig worker running on fumes, the warehouse employee clocking in while injured, the outsourced laborer earning pennies on the dollar. Their suffering is calculated, optimized, and fed into the system like fuel. You benefit. Even if you don't want to, even if you try not to. Because this isn't about individual cruelty. It's structural, built into the DNA of our civilization. For one person to rise, another must kneel. For one country to flourish, another must be stripped bare. Think of the Industrial Revolution, a time hailed as humanity's great leap forward. But what powered it? Child labor, unsafe conditions, exploited immigrants, environmental devastation. We call it progress, they called it survival. Or consider the fashion industry. Fast, disposable, affordable, and deadly. The Rana Plaza collapse killed over 1,000 garment workers in Bangladesh. Their deaths weren't a failure of the system, they were a feature of it. The true price of a cheap shirt isn't on the tag. It's in the rubble, the blood, the silence. But the most sinister part, the way we're taught not to see it. We're told stories of progress as if they were miracles, clean, inevitable, universally good. But they are carefully curated myths. The exploitation is hidden behind algorithms, offshore accounts, and outsourced blame. You're encouraged to believe you're just a consumer, just one person. You can't see the chains if they're built into the background. And when you do see it, when the veil slips, when the footage leaks, when the stories break, you're handed a distraction, a new cause, a rebrand, a promise that things are getting better. But are they, or are we just getting better at covering it up? Progress becomes a kind of moral laundering, a way to justify suffering so long as it moves us forward, so long as there's a net gain. But whose gain are we talking about? And who keeps losing? Even in the digital world, where physical labor seems irrelevant, the pattern repeats. AI systems trained on unpaid labor, content moderators, developing PTSD, so the rest of us can scroll safely. Behind every invisible wall is a human bearing the weight of your convenience. This is the uncomfortable truth. Utopias are built on unseen pain. Every modern comfort sits on the shoulders of someone who never had a choice. The illusion of progress is that it lifts all boats. The reality is, it sinks some to raise others. But here's the final twist, the one that should haunt you. Even if you try to opt out, you're still inside it. Every product, every platform, every system you touch is entangled with exploitation. The clothes you wear, the food you eat, the devices you use. You can't consume ethically in a structure built on inequity. So what do you do with that knowledge? Some people deny it, others rationalize it. Most simply compartmentalize, because acknowledging it fully is paralyzing. But ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. Maybe the goal isn't to pretend we're innocent. Maybe it's to stop pretending at all, to admit the truth. Progress, as we know it, has always demanded a sacrifice, and someone, somewhere, is always paying the price. Peace is always painted as the ideal, the goal, the ultimate destination after suffering ends and justice prevails. But what if peace isn't what it appears to be? What if peace, as we know it, isn't a triumph of diplomacy or a reward for restraint, but something far colder? A strategic pause, a breath held between bursts of violence. A quiet before the next profitable storm. Imagine a war. Picture the chaos, the booming of bombs, the shattering of cities, the headlines screaming catastrophe. But now, look behind the curtain. Behind every explosion, there's an invoice. Every bullet fired, every tank deployed, every drone launched, it's all paid for. Trillions of dollars exchanged hands. and someone always gets rich. War is horrific, but it's also immensely lucrative. Companies that manufacture weapons don't pray for peace. They plan for conflict. Their survival, their growth, their record profits depend on one thing: sustained, justifiable violence. And so peace, true, unbroken, disarmed peace, is bad for business. It halts production, slows the contracts, starves the shareholders. That kind of peace. It's a liability. So what do you do when peace threatens your bottom line? You rebrand war. You don't call it conquest, you call it intervention. You don't admit to profit. You speak of liberation. The language softens, but the bombs stay sharp. And when a war ends, you don't disband the machine. You pivot. You look for the next hotspot, the next regime, the next threat. Always another enemy. Always another excuse. This is why peace is never the conclusion. It's a negotiation between paychecks, a reset, a retooling. And while the public cheers the end of hostilities, those behind the scenes are already asking what comes next. Which region is unstable? Which borders are brittle? Which ideology can be painted as dangerous? Because war doesn't need truth. It needs marketing. And peace needs a story. It needs heroes and villains, clean victories and hopeful promises. It needs to feel like a reward, not a strategy. But that story is often fiction. Because real peace, lasting peace, requires dismantling the systems that feed on conflict. And those systems are not interested in their own extinction. Think of the military-industrial complex, a phrase that once rang as a warning, now embedded so deeply into modern life. It sounds like background noise. Defense budgets balloon while hospitals crumble. Weapons are prioritized over welfare. The state doesn't shrink when peace arrives, it recalibrates. The funds don't vanish, they just shift. Surveillance grows. Private security expands. The enemy morphs from external to internal. And you're told it's for your safety. That this peace is fragile. That vigilance is necessary. That readiness is patriotic. But really, you're being conditioned. Prepared for the next phase. Groomed for acceptance. Peace becomes not a celebration, but a marketing campaign. A product, and like any product, it must be sold, maintained, and eventually replaced. And so the media shifts. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the seeds are planted. Deitators speculate, tensions rising in distant lands. Think tanks whisper of instability. Intelligence leaks suggest a looming threat. The narrative builds. Piece by piece, war returns, not with a bang, but with a briefing. And when it erupts again, it doesn't feel sudden. It feels inevitable, because peace was never the plan, just the prelude. This isn't conspiracy. This is capitalism. Conflict creates markets. It justifies surveillance. It swells defense budgets. It funnels public money into private hands. And the soldiers, the civilians, the collateral damage, they're just line items. Statistics, acceptable losses in the pursuit of perpetual growth. And here's the final cruel twist. You're made to feel grateful for the peace you're given, even when it's not peace at all. Even when it's a heavily armed silence, you're told to cherish it. To not question the build-up, to not criticize the motives. Because if you do, you're not being peaceful. You're being unpatriotic. But maybe peace isn't the absence of war. Maybe peace as we know it is just the pause that lets the war machine reload. Have you ever wondered why the sacrifice of one always seems easier to accept than the scrutiny of many? Look closer. Our society runs on a principle so deeply embedded, it masquerades as common sense. Maintain order at all costs, even if it means letting a few fall. Especially if it means letting a few fall. These aren't always criminals or villains. Sometimes they're just inconvenient, too loud, too different, too honest. And when they threaten the illusion, we silence them, not with violence, but with indifference. We call it a consequence. We tell ourselves they should have known better, done better, stayed quiet. But beneath that thin rationale is a terrifying truth. These scapegoats serve a purpose. They're warnings. Human billboards that read, "Don't ask questions, don't stray too far." Because when the many begin to question, systems start to tremble. Look at whistleblowers. Not the ones celebrated years later in documentaries, but the ones currently exiled, imprisoned, forgotten. People who spoke truths that were too dangerous, too disruptive. The message was clear: expose the cracks, and you become the crack. The system doesn't thank you for your honesty. It makes an example of you. It isn't just about law or politics. It's social, psychological, instinctual. In school, the child who challenges the teacher's authority is labeled a troublemaker. In the office, the employee who points out systemic inefficiencies becomes not a team player. In society, the thinker who questions sacred beliefs is branded a radical. Slowly, subtly, the lesson is taught: conformity ensures survival. Curiosity invites exile. And we learn, we internalize. Not because we're weak, but because we're wired for belonging. We watch what happens to those who speak up, and we absorb the cost. You don't have to be punished personally. You only have to witness someone else being punished, and the warning is just as effective. This is what makes the sacrifice so efficient. It only has to happen in public once, and the silence ripples outwards like a shockwave. Not from fear alone, but from a sense of self-preservation wrapped in morality. They deserved it, we whisper. It's not my place, so we don't ask why things are the way they are. We just keep moving. But here's the haunting part. This isn't chaos. This is design. The system knows it can't suppress every voice, so it suppresses strategically. It doesn't need to shut everyone up, just enough to discourage the rest. It doesn't matter if the scapegoat is innocent, intelligent, or well-meaning. In fact, it's better if they are. Their fall is more jarring that way, more memorable, a sharper lesson for the onlookers. It's a performance, a public ritual of sacrifice dressed up as justice, as policy, as common sense. And still, most don't see it. Because we don't want to. It's easier to believe the fallen were flawed, that they brought it on themselves. That the system is sound, and only the deviant pay the price. This lie is easier to live with than the alternative, that we are all complicit, that silence is its own kind of violence. We tell ourselves we'd speak up if something was truly wrong. But wrong is rarely obvious. It's dressed in etiquette, hierarchy, bureaucracy. It whispers, not screams. And by the time you realize what's happening, the sacrifice has already been made. We call it justice. We call it order. But it's fear. Fear of asking, fear of being, fear of knowing. So we trade a few lives for our peace of mind. And here's the most disturbing truth. The system doesn't just sacrifice the few to protect the many. It sacrifices the few, so the many never think to question why the system demands sacrifices at all. Have you ever wondered why people follow rules they openly mock, secretly despise, and privately disobey? You've seen it. The colleague who jokes about corporate policies but never dares to break them. The student who ridicules school rules but still asks permission to use the bathroom. The citizen who rails against authority, yet files their taxes on time. They know the rules are arbitrary, sometimes even absurd, but they follow them anyway. Why? Because the cost of disobedience is never just punishment. It's exile, alienation. It's being marked as unpredictable in a world that worships conformity. Most rules aren't enforced with guns or threats. They're enforced with silence, shame, and the fear of being seen as dangerous, not because you're violent, but because you're different. That's the first layer of control, social fear dressed as self-restraint. And here's the strange part. The more someone hates a rule, the more carefully they often obey it. Not because they respect it, but because they fear what it would reveal about them if they didn't. Break a rule you despise, and suddenly people see you, not just your action, but your intention. You're no longer harmless, you're visible, and visibility is risk. So you laugh at the rule, mock it, call it stupid, but you still comply because mocking is safe. Disobedience is not. But why do these rules even exist? Because rules are rituals. They're not about logic, they're about obedience. They train you not just to behave, but to internalize control. The more senseless the rule, the more powerful it becomes. When someone obeys a rule they know is absurd, they're not just following orders, they're surrendering their judgment. And that's the point. Think about school dress codes, corporate jargon, religious taboos. These aren't about efficiency or truth. They're about submission. They teach you to self-regulate, to become your own warden. You start anticipating authority, censoring yourself before anyone has to. You don't follow the rule because it's right. You follow it because it's expected. And that expectation, it's invisible but heavy, like gravity. This is why revolutions are rare. Not because people love the system, but because they've learned to fear what living without it might mean. Chaos, rejection, isolation. So even when the rules are unjust, cruel, even ridiculous, people follow, not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to associate safety with submission. And the training starts early. Children are taught to ask permission for everything, from speaking to standing. They're rewarded for compliance, punished for defiance. Not because their behavior was harmful, but because it challenged order. By adulthood, the pattern is complete. You obey, not because you believe, but because it's automatic, conditioned, and it works brilliantly. Because once obedience becomes reflex, it no longer needs justification. You don't question the rule. You question yourself for even thinking to disobey. That's the deepest level of control, when rebellion feels immoral, even when the rule is absurd. But here's the paradox. Even as people follow these hated rules, they secretly admire those who break them. The whistleblower, the rebel, the one who speaks truth in a room full of silence. Not because they're evil, but because they're free. And freedom, real freedom, is terrifying. It means responsibility, visibility, risk, but it also means something else. It means reclaiming your mind, because every time you obey a rule you despise, a part of you dies. The part that questions, the part that sees clearly, the part that resists. And over time, those parts atrophy. You forget what it felt like to be free, not in body, but in thought. That's the true cost of silent obedience, intellectual decay. But the moment you see it, really see it, everything changes. You realize the cage was never physical, it was psychological. You were trained to fear your own freedom, and suddenly, the rules you once followed religiously start to look thin, fragile, breakable. You don't have to start with revolution. Start with awareness. Ask yourself, which rules do you follow just to be accepted? Which ones do you hate, but obey anyway? What does that obedience cost you? And more importantly, what would it mean to stop? Because rules aren't just rules, they're mirrors. Every time you follow one you despise, you're staring into the reflection of your own compliance. And maybe it's time to break that mirror. Imagine a classroom full of children. One child refuses to sit still, questions every rule, and challenges the teacher's authority. Another child follows every instruction perfectly, quiet, polite, obedient. Now ask yourself, which one gets praised? The obedient one, of course. But here's the disturbing truth. Obedience is often mistaken for goodness, not because it's morally superior, but because it's easier to manage. From an early age, you're taught that being good means doing what you're told, following instructions, keeping quiet. But that's not morality, that's conditioning. And over time, the line between genuine virtue and passive compliance gets blurred beyond recognition. Obedience is praised because it maintains order. It keeps systems running, schools quiet, workplaces efficient. It's the lubricant of society's machinery. But it comes at a cost. Your autonomy. You stop asking why. You stop challenging assumptions. You begin to associate disobedience with danger, rebellion, even evil. But what if the most moral action isn't obedience? What if it's dissent? Think of history. Slavery was legal. Segregation was institutionalized. Genocide was bureaucratically approved. And the people who committed these atrocities weren't all monsters. Many were good citizens, simply following orders, doing their job. Obeying they didn't question because they were trained not to. Their morality had been replaced with compliance. Their sense of right and wrong, overwritten by a desire to avoid punishment, avoid attention, avoid trouble. But goodness, true goodness, isn't about avoiding trouble. It's about doing what's right, even when it's unpopular, even when it's illegal, even when it's dangerous. Obedience doesn't require ethics. It doesn't ask you to think, to feel, to consider consequences. It only asks for one thing: submission. And submission, in the wrong hands, becomes complicity. Consider the workplace. A manager enforces unfair policies. A co-worker is mistreated. And yet you do nothing. Not because you agree, but because you've learned that speaking out brings risk. You convince yourself you're being professional, mature, responsible. But really, you're being obedient. And the system rewards you for it. Promotions go to those who don't rock the boat. Praise is given to those who comply, not those who confront. You're told you're a team player, a model employee. But underneath that, praise lies something darker. Your silence has value. Your obedience serves power. Now think about the justice system. Think about laws that punish the poor while protecting the rich. Think about orders given to law enforcement that target marginalized communities. Obedient officers, judges, and jurors carry out these laws, not because they believe in them, but because it's their job, because they're told it's right, because they've equated legality with morality. But legality isn't morality, and obedience isn't goodness. They only appear similar when viewed through the lens of control. The moment you begin to equate obedience with virtue, you make yourself vulnerable to tyranny. You become the kind of person who follows the rules, even when the rules are wrong, who stays silent, even when silence causes harm, who defers to authority, even when that authority demands cruelty. And it's not just systems of power that exploit this. Relationships do too. Think of a partner who demands total compliance, disguising control as care. Think of a parent who punishes disagreement, calling it disrespect. Think of a friend who uses guilt to ensure you never say no. In every case, obedience is mistaken for love, loyalty, kindness. But it's not. It's fear. Conditioned, normalized fear. The truth is, being good often means being disobedient. It means standing up when others sit down, speaking out when others stay quiet, risking reputation, comfort, even safety, because conscience demands it. But this is terrifying, because disobedience makes you a target. It isolates you. It strips away the comforting illusion that you're protected as long as you follow the rules. And so most people choose the easier path, the quieter path, the one lined with applause and approval. But ask yourself, what kind of goodness depends on being liked? Real morality is lonely. It's uncomfortable. It often looks like rebellion, and that's why society teaches you to conflate obedience with virtue, because the system can't function if too many people start thinking for themselves, if too many people start disobeying unjust orders, if too many people realize that the rules aren't sacred. So the next time someone calls you good for keeping quiet, for doing what you're told, for following the script, ask yourself what they're really praising, your character or your compliance. Because in the end, the world doesn't need more obedient people. It needs more moral people. People with the courage to disobey, to disrupt, to dismantle. Being good is dangerous. Being obedient is easy. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll serve power thinking, you're serving justice. You'll uphold harm, believing you're upholding peace. And worst of all, you'll silence your conscience, thinking you're being good, when all your being is controlled. Imagine a man standing in front of a store window, gazing at a suit he can't afford. Behind him, another man slips by in a tailored jacket, polished shoes, and a practiced smile. The onlookers don't blame the man in the jacket for his wealth. They don't even notice him. Instead, they judge the man staring at the window for being lazy, for making bad choices, for not working hard enough. That's how it works. That's the sleight of hand. Society doesn't just tolerate inequality, it hides it. And one of its most reliable tricks is simple. Blame the poor, blame them loudly, constantly, and in such intricate detail that the rich remain unseen, like ghosts who built the house but left no fingerprints. It starts young, from school hallways to news headlines. We're taught to believe poverty is a personal failing. If someone is struggling, it must be because they didn't try hard enough, didn't plan well enough, didn't want success badly enough. The system is supposedly fair, and so if you lose, the blame is yours. But that's the lie. The system isn't fair, it's rigged. Yet, instead of questioning the system, we question the ones crushed by it. That blame serves a purpose. It creates a convenient distraction, a psychological scapegoat that protects the true beneficiaries of inequality from scrutiny. Because here's the truth. The poor are not the problem. They're the evidence. They are living proof that opportunity is not equally distributed, that success isn't purely merit-based, that intelligence and hard work often mean nothing if you're born in the wrong zip code, to the wrong family, or with the wrong skin. But rather than let that uncomfortable reality set in, society rebrands it. It rewrites it into a cautionary tale. Don't end up like them, it whispers. Work harder, obey more, fit in. And by doing so, it weaponizes shame. Shame is powerful. It silences, it isolates, and it turns the poor against each other. When you're struggling to survive, it's easy to start believing the blame, easy to internalize the message that you're defective, that you're failing while everyone else is succeeding. Meanwhile, the rich move through the world unnoticed. Their advantages are painted as normal. Private schools? Just smart parenting. Inherited wealth? Just good fortune. Legal loopholes and offshore accounts? Just smart business. They aren't portrayed as leeches, but as leaders, not as exploiters, but as role models. They don't get asked, "Why don't you give more?" or "Why do you hoard so much?" Instead, the poor are interrogated. "Why don't you try harder? Why do you need help? Why can't you just lift yourself up?" This inversion isn't accidental, it's essential. Because visibility is dangerous. If people really saw how wealth is accumulated, how it feeds on underpaid labor, tax avoidance, and systemic privilege, then the illusion of fairness collapses. So the rich must be hidden, and the poor must be paraded. Every news story about welfare fraud, every joke about food stamps, every scolding about spending habits, they all serve one function: to keep your eyes looking down, to make you resent those below you instead of questioning those above. This is how you build a class hierarchy that polices itself. You don't need armed guards when people enforce the rules on each other. When the middle class fears slipping, and the poor fear being judged, no one looks up. No one asks why billionaires exist in a world of poverty. And if anyone does look up, if they demand answers, they're branded as radicals, dreamers, or worse, threats. This is the true genius of the system. It doesn't just create inequality, it normalizes it, glorifies it. It teaches us to see wealth as virtue and poverty as shame. But once you see the trick, you can't unsee it. You realize that blaming the poor is not just cruel, it's calculated. It's the mechanism that keeps the rich invisible. Because if the poor are to blame, the rich are innocent. If poverty is deserved, then wealth is too. And if we believe that, we'll never ask the question that really matters. Who is benefiting from all this suffering? Because the answer isn't hidden. It's just standing behind the glass, smiling. Imagine a battlefield littered, not with bodies, but with books, pages soaked not in blood, but in bias. Now imagine you're holding one of those books, a history textbook, clean, authoritative, certain. But here's the catch: it's lying to you, not with malice, but with omission. Because history isn't written by winners, it's written by survivors. You've been told the victors write history, but that's only half the truth. Victors may try, but they don't always last. Empires fall, revolutions consume their creators, movements fracture, power fades. What endures? The records left behind by those who lived long enough to write them. The voices that made it through the fire. Not always the strongest, but the most adaptable, the most hidden, the least threatening. Think of the Library of Alexandria, a vast ocean of human thought gone in flames. Not because it lost a war, but because it couldn't survive one. Its knowledge, its version of history was erased, not by enemies but by entropy. What survived wasn't the truth, but what could be copied, smuggled, remembered. Survival dictated what was preserved and what was forgotten. Now ask yourself, who survives? Often, it's not the most righteous, it's the most invisible, the ones who bend instead of break. The ones who say just enough to avoid suspicion, but never enough to be silenced. These survivors aren't heroes or villains, they're simply the ones left to tell the tale. And when they write, they don't just recount facts, they reshape them, repurpose them, make them palatable for their future. The early Christians weren't winners, they were hunted, tortured, crucified. But they survived. And when the Roman Empire eventually collapsed into decay and desperation, Christianity was there to fill the void. Not because it had conquered Rome, but because it had outlasted it. And in rewriting Rome's story, it also rewrote its own. The same goes for the narratives of colonialism. Entire civilizations, Aztec, Inca, African kingdoms, were crushed under the weight of European empires. But who wrote the stories? Not always the generals or kings. Often it was the missionaries, the bureaucrats, the survivors embedded within the machine. They didn't just document history, they sanitized it, reframed it, made genocide sound like civilization, made exploitation sound like discovery. And what about resistance? The stories of rebellion that survive aren't usually the most heroic. They're the ones that didn't get completely obliterated. We remember Spartacus, not because he won, but because his legend lingered, passed through whispers, myths, and eventually cinema. The real rebels. Most of them were erased so thoroughly that not even their names survived. No gravestone, no myth, just silence. This is the terrifying part. History favors those who leave a record, not necessarily those who deserve remembrance. Dictators keep diaries. Regimes build archives. Oppressors commission portraits, coinage, national anthems. And when they fall, those relics remain, often forming the foundation of the next version of truth. Even now, in our supposedly connected age, history is being shaped by survivors, not by what actually happened, but by who has the power to tell the story afterward. Algorithms amplify certain narratives while others disappear into digital oblivion. We confuse preservation with truth, assuming that if something survived, it must be accurate. But survival is not a virtue, it's a tactic. Look at any modern conflict. Each side claims righteousness. Each side documents atrocities. But what you remember, what gets taught, what gets archived, depends on which side is still standing decades from now. And more importantly, which side's records remain accessible, intact, and convenient for future retellings. Now think about yourself. What truths do you carry that might never be written down? What stories will vanish with you? Your version of events, your history, only exists as long as you exist. If you don't write it, share it, preserve it, it dies, and someone else will write over it. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The survivors have space to fill, and silence is too dangerous to leave untouched. This is why history should never be trusted blindly. Not because it's fiction, but because it's curated, sculpted, survived. The ones who scream, who fight, who resist, they often vanish. The ones who adapt, hide, blend in, they write. And when they write, they don't just record, they edit. And every edit is a choice, a judgment, a distortion. So next time you read a textbook, visit a museum, or watch a documentary, remember this: you're not seeing the truth, you're seeing what survived. And survival, more often than not, is just another form of compromise. Because in the end, history is not the story of the strongest. It's not even the story of the right. It's the story of the ones who endured long enough to tell it. And that should terrify you more than any lie ever could. Imagine walking through a hospital ward, sterile white walls humming with fluorescent light, rows of beds, bodies curled in pain, machines beeping like cold metronomes. But here's the strange thing. You don't feel shocked. You don't feel outrage, because everyone here is suffering the right way, quietly, respectably, socially approved. We like to think suffering is always a tragedy, that we instinctively want to stop it. But that's not entirely true. Some suffering we not only tolerate, we endorse, we praise it, romanticize it, even moralize it. Pain that fits our cultural script becomes invisible, or worse, virtuous. Take overwork, the endless grind, waking up before the sun, pushing past exhaustion, skipping meals, ignoring pain, all in the name of productivity. This isn't called suffering, it's called dedication, commitment, hard work. But make no mistake, it's pain, it's slow, sanctioned self-destruction. And yet, society doesn't just accept it, it rewards it. You get applause for working late. You're admired for burning out. Suffering becomes a resume item. Pain becomes proof of value. Why? Because this kind of suffering serves the system. Exhausted workers don't rebel. They don't question. They don't dream. But it's not just work. Think about beauty. The diets, the surgeries, the starvation wrapped in silk and Instagram filters. The hours spent squeezing into discomfort, erasing wrinkles, reshaping bodies. All to meet an invisible standard no one chose but everyone enforces. This suffering is praised, masked as self-discipline, labeled as confidence, but beneath it, insecurity, weaponized, identity hollowed out, approval dangled like a drug. And yet, speak out against it. You're told you lack willpower, that you're lazy, that you're weak, for refusing to conform to pain, disguised as perfection. Then there's masculinity. Men taught to repress emotion, to see vulnerability as failure, alone. Depression becomes weakness. Tears become betrayal. So they bury everything. And when it erupts, society blames them for breaking the rules it forced them to follow. This kind of suffering isn't seen as cruel. It's tradition, rite of passage, proof of manhood, a generational inheritance of silent despair. And still, we go deeper. Think of poverty, people working 2-3 jobs and still not making ends meet. Not because they're lazy, but because the system is designed for them to struggle. Yet, their pain is dismissed. They're told to budget better, work harder, smile more. Their suffering isn't just approved, it's expected. A backdrop for other people's comfort, a necessary cost for someone else's convenience or grief. Mourning that's neat and quiet. Cry, but not too long. Be sad, but don't make it uncomfortable. Move on quickly. Smile politely. Society tolerates grief only when it's tidy, processed, hidden. Real grief, ugly, raw, disruptive, is unwelcome. Because true suffering is inconvenient. It demands we stop and see, and we can't have that. Even in mental health, the moment someone's suffering no longer fits the script, it's pathologized. People struggling with depression are told to get help, but only in ways that don't disturb others. Therapies that fit into schedules, medications that mute symptoms. But if the pain seeps out through anger or silence or breakdowns, then it's no longer palatable, then it's dangerous. And here's the dark truth. Suffering that disrupts order is punished, but suffering that sustains it is praised. Society doesn't fear pain. It fears the wrong kind of pain. Pain that questions. Pain that resists. Pain that makes people ask why things are the way they are. Approved suffering, though. That's pain that keeps things running. But what happens when you start to notice the script? When you realize that your suffering was never yours, it was assigned to you, that you were taught to suffer in ways that benefit others, that your pain was curated, not chosen. It's a shattering realization, because it means that healing isn't just personal, it's political. To stop suffering in the way society approves of is to rebel, to rest when you're expected to grind, to eat when you're expected to starve, to cry when you're expected to smile. That's resistance. And they'll call you selfish for it, weak, undisciplined, because you're breaking the pact. You're refusing to play your part in the theater of socially sanctioned pain. But the truth is, not all suffering is equal. Some of it is forced upon you with applause. Some of it is sold to you as virtue. And some of it, the most dangerous kind, is so normalized that you stop realizing it's suffering at all. Until one day you wake up and ask, who decided this pain was noble? Who benefits from my quiet endurance? And what would happen if I simply said, no more? You've been told that justice is a principle, that it's blind, that it's the anchor holding society in place. But look closer, and you'll see something far darker. Justice only exists when it's convenient, when it serves those in power, when it doesn't cost too much. Justice isn't a constant. It's a performance. Think of the last time justice made headlines, a high-profile trial, a public scandal. The media swarmed, statements were made, and punishments were handed down. It looked righteous. It looked clean. But that's the trick. It only looked that way because the system wanted you to see it, needed you to see it. Justice was put on stage, carefully dressed and choreographed, not because the truth demanded it, but because convenience allowed it. But when justice is inconvenient, when it threatens wealth, power, or status, it vanishes. Suddenly, things get complicated. Suddenly, the law is full of grey areas, loopholes, delays. The process becomes slow, bureaucratic, opaque. Documents go missing. Evidence becomes inadmissible. The very system designed to uphold justice begins to obscure it. Justice, it turns out, isn't blind at all. It sees money. It sees connections, it sees who's watching, and more importantly, who isn't. Convenience determines whether justice shows up. Look at who gets arrested quickly, who gets charged, who gets punished without mercy. It's never the powerful. It's never the well-connected. It's the disposable, the voiceless, the ones whose pain doesn't spark outrage, whose names won't trend, whose stories don't sell. For them, justice isn't just absent, it's a weapon used against them, a burden they carry while others walk free. And this isn't a glitch, it's the design. Justice is wielded like a tool, not applied like a law. When it reinforces existing hierarchies, it's enforced with brutal efficiency. But the moment it challenges those hierarchies, it's restrained. Justice is called idealistic. You're told to be patient. You're told it's complicated. You're told to wait for a justice that never comes. Because convenience isn't just about time or effort. It's about optics. Justice only matters when it's visible, when ignoring it would spark unrest or public shame, when the cost of inaction outweighs the cost of action. Then, and only then, does justice move. This is why the system responds faster to public relations than public need. It prosecutes when cameras roll. It sympathizes when donors demand it. It reacts when inaction becomes a threat to control. Justice is not a sacred principle. It's a variable, adjusted depending on how loud you scream and how useful your suffering is to someone else's agenda. Think of the whistleblower, punished for telling the truth. The protester jailed while the corrupt remain free. The poor man sentenced for theft while the wealthy evade taxes. These aren't exceptions, they're patterns. And those patterns whisper a truth that few are willing to hear. Justice is not about fairness. It's about function. It exists to preserve stability, not to challenge injustice. When it aligns with order, it acts decisively. When it threatens order, it vanishes. So when someone tells you that justice will come, that the system works, ask yourself, works for whom? Justice does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in context. It serves those it protects. And when it's inconvenient to serve you, it simply doesn't. This isn't defeatist. It's awareness. Because when you realize justice is conditional, you stop waiting. You stop trusting a system built to disappoint you. You begin to see that real justice, lasting justice, won't arrive on its own. It has to be forced. Because convenience will never bring justice. Pressure will. Noise will. Refusal to be silent will. So stop expecting the system to deliver what it was never designed to give. Start demanding what it fears you'll ask for. Justice not as a convenience, but as a right, uncompromising, unearned, unbought, universal. Until then, what we call justice is just performance. A mask worn when it suits power, and discarded the moment it doesn't. Imagine someone crying in front of you. Their voice cracks, their hands tremble. They tell you they're in pain and that only you can make it stop. Your instinct kicks in. You lean in, you offer help, you lower your guard. That moment right there, the one that makes you feel human, compassionate, good, is the same moment a manipulator waits for. Because empathy, when pure and unprotected, is one of the most dangerous vulnerabilities a person can have. Manipulators understand something most people don't. Empathy is not just an emotion, it's a tool, and tools can be twisted, sharpened, and weaponized. They don't need to overpower you. They only need to convince you that they're wounded. The predator plays the victim. The abuser cries louder than the abused. The liar wraps themselves in sincerity so convincingly that even your gut instincts hesitate. You're not manipulated by their strength, but by their weakness. Empathy disarms you. It asks you to take their pain seriously, even when your own alarms are blaring. It tells you to listen when you should run. It tells you to give when you're already drained. It tells you to forgive before you've even processed the harm. That's the first lie, that someone's suffering always means they're harmless. But the more terrifying lie is this: you'll start to believe that setting boundaries makes you cruel, that protecting yourself makes you heartless, that saying no is a kind of violence. And that is exactly where the manipulator wants you. They push the narrative until you confuse empathy with obedience, until kindness becomes submission, until your guilt becomes their leash. It starts small: a favor, an exception, a second chance. They tell you their story, and your heart breaks. You feel noble for helping. But each act of compassion turns into a brick, building the walls of a prison you can't see. Soon helping them isn't a choice, it's a duty. You stop asking what you need. You start wondering what they might need next. You anticipate their emotions before you even recognize your own. And when you finally reach your limit, something terrifying happens. They cry again. They shiver, collapse, accuse. "I thought you cared," they say. "You're just like everyone else." And suddenly, you're the villain for walking away from the pain they created. Empathy, when hijacked, becomes a control system. The more sensitive you are, the more exploitable you become. The more moral you try to be, the more power they gain. Because manipulators don't fight fair. They don't argue with logic. They argue with your sense of responsibility. They argue with your conscience. They will bring up your past kindness, not to thank you, but to demand more. They will replay their suffering, not to heal, but to reopen the wound whenever you try to close the door. This is not empathy. This is emotional extortion. And the most brutal part: the world will often take their side, because society rewards visible vulnerability. Whoever cries first, loudest, or most convincingly gets the benefit of the doubt. Empathy isn't evenly distributed. It's easily manipulated by performance. Manipulators know this. They weaponize tears like bullets. They exploit every social reflex we've been trained to obey. Be kind, be patient, be understanding. But there's a difference between understanding pain and submitting to it. Empathy is not a contract. It is not an agreement to sacrifice your dignity so someone else can avoid accountability. Real empathy includes you. Real empathy has boundaries. And that's the hardest lesson for good people to learn. That saying enough doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sane. That closing the door doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. That your compassion was never the problem, but your silence might be. Because empathy without limits doesn't make you noble. It makes you a target. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to be used. Some people are born to be controlled. You've seen them before. Maybe you work with one. Maybe you live with one. People who don't just tolerate control, they seem to crave it. They look for someone to follow, someone to obey, someone to tell them what to do and how to feel. And no, it's not always fear. It's comfort. It's relief. It's the soothing calm of not having to think for themselves. Not everyone is wired for autonomy. That's a truth we rarely say out loud, because it's ugly, because it undermines everything we're told about freedom and individuality. But look closely. Watch how some people flinch at choice, how they freeze when confronted with responsibility. For them, freedom isn't liberating, it's terrifying. Control offers safety, predictability. It promises that if they just obey, if they just follow the rules, someone else will carry the burden of consequence. And for some, that trade-off feels like peace. But why? Why would anyone want to be controlled? It starts early. For some children, obedience is the only path to approval. They're taught that questioning authority leads to punishment, that good behavior equals acceptance. Over time, they internalize this. Obedience becomes identity. They grow up equating submission with love, compliance with safety. Then there's temperament. Psychology recognizes it. Some people have a naturally high need for structure. They feel anxious in ambiguity, unsettled by unpredictability. For them, rigid systems and strict rules don't feel like confinement. They feel like order. But it's deeper than temperament or upbringing. It's about fear. A fear so primal it bypasses logic. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of rejection. Fear of failure. And most of all, fear of self. Because to truly be free, you have to trust yourself. You have to believe in your own judgment, your own voice, your own worth, and for some, that trust never forms. So they outsource it. They hand the steering wheel of their lives to anyone willing to take it. This is why cults exist, why totalitarian regimes rise, why people submit not just to rules but to rulers, because the promise of control, of clarity, of certainty, of being told exactly what to do, feels like salvation to those drowning in their own doubt. They don't resist, they welcome it. They romanticize the strong leader, the strict doctrine, the black and white morality, because it erases complexity. It simplifies the chaos of existence into manageable commandments. Obey and you're good. Disobey and you're evil. There's no gray, no confusion, just certainty. But here's the danger. When people crave control, they become dangerous, not just to themselves, but to everyone else. Because once they've surrendered their autonomy, they expect others to do the same. They police deviation. They enforce conformity, not out of malice, but because your freedom threatens their illusion of order. They become the enforcers of the system that owns them. You've seen it in history. Ordinary people becoming tools of oppression. Soldiers claiming they were just following orders. Citizens turning in neighbors for wrong think. Not because they're evil, but because they were raised to believe that control equals righteousness. But it's not just in dictatorships. It's in corporations, in classrooms, in families, anywhere structure exists. Someone is always too eager to surrender. They blend into hierarchies. They find meaning in subordination. They don't ask why, only how high to jump. This isn't about intelligence. Many of these people are smart, even brilliant. But intelligence doesn't equal independence. Critical thinking requires courage, and courage is rare when your entire life has taught you that safety lies in obedience. And so the system rewards them. These controlled people make ideal citizens, ideal workers, ideal followers. They don't protest. They don't question. They comply. and in return they're given just enough comfort to never feel the bars of their own prison. But if you are not one of them, if you feel that itch, that restless discomfort with authority, you become a threat. Your independence is seen not as strength, but as deviance. Your refusal to be controlled becomes dangerous to those who define themselves by control. They will try to break you, guilt you, isolate you, call you arrogant, selfish, disobedient. Because in your freedom, they see their own chains. But here's the paradox: they're not entirely wrong. Some people are born to be controlled. Their biology, their psychology, their upbringing, it all converges into a life of comfortable submission. And maybe they're even happier that way. Maybe ignorance really is bliss for them. But you are not them. And if you pretend to be, you'll rot from the inside out. Because to live like them is to deny the very part of you that refuses to be owned. That flicker of rebellion. That quiet voice that whispers no when the world demands yes. That's your compass. Don't silence it. In the end, the world needs both types, but only one survives with dignity intact. Choose carefully, because once you surrender your freedom, getting it back is almost impossible, and some never even realize they gave it away. Have you ever wondered why the system allows people to believe it's falling apart? Why you can scream into the void, criticize its failures, post about its corruption, and nothing changes? Because that's the genius of it. The system works precisely because most people believe it's broken. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Believing the system is broken makes you feel awake, enlightened, even rebellious. But if you truly believed it was working as intended, what would that say about your place in it, about your complicity, about the horrifying possibility that the suffering you see isn't a bug, but the design? It's comforting to think the machine is malfunctioning, because then it can be fixed, repaired, restored. But what if it's functioning exactly as it was meant to? When you believe the system is broken, you're less likely to dismantle it. Instead, you wait. Hope. Vote harder. Protest within the lines. You think reform is coming, that the cracks are signs of change, that eventually someone will fix it. You don't realize that this belief is exactly what keeps you in place. Hope becomes a leash. Dissent becomes a pressure valve. Outrage becomes routine. Every documentary exposing corruption, every scandal, every moment of righteous anger reinforces the illusion of dysfunction, when in fact it's ritual, a pantomime, bread and circuses for the disillusioned. Because if people really understood that the system isn't broken, it's brutal, efficient and purposeful, they might actually do something dangerous. They might stop participating. They might stop playing their part. But that's where the next trick comes in. The system allows you just enough discontent to feel superior to it, without ever escaping it. You mock politicians, complain about bureaucracy, curse inequality, but still file your taxes, still clock in at work, still follow the rules. The illusion of rebellion is the deepest form of control. You believe you're resisting, but you're reinforcing. Even activism, in many forms, has been commodified, packaged into hashtags, merch and digestible outrage. You're encouraged to speak out, as long as it's in ways that don't threaten real power. The system needs your frustration. It thrives on it, because frustration without direction is harmless. It burns you out, wears you down, makes you cynical. And cynicism doesn't lead to revolution. It leads to apathy, and apathy is the end game. When people are too tired to care, too jaded to act, too disillusioned to dream, power becomes permanent. Because the real danger was never the people who believed the system was perfect. It was the ones who saw through it and believed they were helpless to change it. So here's the uncomfortable truth. the system isn't failing, it's succeeding. It's succeeding at making you feel like your voice matters, while ensuring it doesn't change anything. It's succeeding at distracting you with culture wars, while wealth consolidates in silence. It's succeeding at convincing you that someone else will fix it. But no one's coming. There is no savior, no awakening, no final expose that will make the whole thing collapse. There's only a choice to see clearly, or to keep believing the comforting lie that it's all just falling apart. Because as long as you think the system is broken, you'll keep trying to fix it, and you'll never realize it's working exactly as it was meant to. Imagine you've discovered something, a truth so sharp, so precise, it cuts through everything, your beliefs, your relationships, your identity. At first, it feels liberating, pure, like you've broken free from the fog of confusion that clouds everyone else. But then, something strange happens. The truth doesn't set you free. It isolates you, it unsettles others. It becomes dangerous, not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer useful. Truth, you see, has never been neutral. It's only ever been tolerated when it serves a function, when it comforts, when it guides, when it reinforces the structure of our lives. But what happens when a truth disrupts? When it no longer reassures, but threatens? That's when we hide it, suppress it, censor it, not because it's false, but because it no longer fits the narrative we've agreed to believe in. Society is built on useful truths, not necessarily accurate ones, but the ones that keep people moving, working, obeying. Hard work pays off. Justice is blind. Good things happen to good people. These aren't empirical facts, they're societal tools, constructs that hold civilizations together. They keep people hopeful. They prevent collapse, and so long as they function, they're upheld. But the moment a truth loses its utility, when it reveals an injustice too vast to fix, a pain too sharp to numb, it becomes a threat, something to be hidden, or worse, ridiculed. Consider this. If you discover that the justice system protects power, not people, what are you supposed to do with that? March into court and shout the truth. You'd be ignored, maybe punished, because now you're not aiding the system, you're exposing its illusion. The truth is only welcome when it preserves the mask. And here's the terrifying part. Most people don't want the truth. Not really. They want the version of it that keeps their lives intact. They crave certainty, comfort, stability. So when a truth begins to unravel the story they've been living, when it starts to question their worth, their safety, their past, they turn away. They don't want clarity, they want coherence. This is why whistleblowers are ostracized, why dissenters are vilified, why prophets are murdered. Not because they lie, but because their truth stops being useful to those in power. And sometimes it's not even about grand conspiracies or systemic oppression. Sometimes the truth becomes dangerous in your own relationships. Imagine telling your partner you're not happy, that you've fallen out of love, that you're staying only out of guilt or habit. That's the truth. But is it useful? Will it fix anything? Or will it destroy what little peace remains? So you lie, or you say nothing. Because the truth, while honest, is radioactive. It doesn't heal, it detonates. And yet, deep down, you know this. You felt it, the way people flinch when you speak too honestly, the way silence suddenly fills the room when you ask the wrong questions. You've learned the script, some truths are better left unsaid, but that's the paradox. The moment truth stops being useful, it starts being necessary, not for others, for you, because suppressing it fractures something inside you. You begin to split. There's the version of you that plays along, smiles politely, nods at lies. And then there's the version that knows, that watches, that remembers. This fracture grows over time, and the longer you go pretending, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You start forgetting who you are, because to be yourself, fully, unapologetically, is to live in alignment with what you know, even if that truth burns everything down. But how do you live with dangerous truth? Carefully, strategically. Not by shouting it from rooftops, but by choosing where it matters. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't to scream the truth into deaf ears, it's to carry it silently, let it shape your choices, your boundaries, your path. You don't have to weaponize the truth, but you also don't have to bury it. Because in a world built on useful lies, a dangerous truth is still your best compass. Even if it isolates you, even if it costs you, because the truth is dangerous, and sometimes that's exactly what makes it worth keeping. You want things to be fair. You think justice is about balance, equality, reciprocity. But deep down, where your instincts hide, you don't really care about fairness. You care about familiarity. You trust what feels known. You protect what feels close, and you rationalize the rest. Look at children. Before they can even speak in full sentences, they already show preference for faces that resemble their parents, for voices that sound like their caregivers, for food, stories, even smells that feel like home. Not because these things are better, but because they're familiar. Familiarity feels safe, and the brain mistakes safety for truth. This bias doesn't disappear as we grow, it just gets more sophisticated. We tell ourselves we value fairness, equity, justice, objectivity, but what we really want is for the world to make sense in ways we already understand. We don't want fairness, we want the illusion of fairness wrapped around what we already know. You see it in politics. People champion policies that benefit people like us, even when those policies hurt others far more. You see it in criminal justice. We believe someone deserves leniency if they remind us of ourselves. Same neighborhood, same accent, same values. But if they're unfamiliar, foreign, different in ways we don't quite know how to explain, we want them punished. Not because they're more guilty, but because they're less recognizable. The lie is that we weigh all things equally. The truth is that we use familiarity as a moral compass, and it's wildly inaccurate. Imagine two crimes, nearly identical. One committed by someone who looks like your cousin, the other by someone who looks like a stranger in a movie about villains. Who do you forgive first? Who do you empathize with? The answer comes before you think. Before you reason, before fairness even enters the room. You didn't choose this. Your brain is designed this way. It's faster to process the known. Familiarity triggers comfort. Comfort triggers trust. And trust makes everything feel more deserving, more justified. This is why corruption survives. This is how prejudice hides. This is the mechanism beneath every good person who unknowingly upholds a broken system. Because to challenge unfairness, you'd have to distrust the familiar. You'd have to scrutinize what feels good. And that's deeply uncomfortable. Think about hiring. Schools, sentencing, medical care, insurance. We pretend these systems are neutral. But behind every supposedly rational decision is a human being with a pattern-seeking brain. And patterns mean comfort. Comfort means familiarity. And familiarity overrides fairness every time. You've seen this play out. The qualified candidate passed over for someone who fit the culture. The patient misdiagnosed because their symptoms didn't match the doctor's default assumptions. The suspect given the benefit of the doubt or denied it based on gut feeling, not evidence, not fairness, just what felt right. But feeling right is often just feeling familiar. And here's the most dangerous part. We reward ourselves for it. We pat ourselves on the back for being just, for being moral, for being fair, when in truth we're just echoing our own preferences, cloaked in the language of principle. You might think you're objective, that you judge based on merit, not bias. But if fairness were truly your guiding principle, your actions would look very different. You'd question your instincts. You'd interrogate your comfort. You'd distrust what feels easy, because fairness doesn't feel good. It feels strange. It feels wrong. It demands that you see worth in people who are nothing like you. It requires that you give up advantages that feel earned but were actually inherited. Fairness is disruptive. It threatens your mental shortcuts. It tears down the scaffolding of familiarity that you mistake for truth. That's why true fairness is so rare, not because we're evil, but because we're lazy. Emotionally lazy, cognitively lazy, and dangerously loyal to what we already know. And so we keep choosing the familiar over and over. We hire it, we vote for it, we trust it, we love it, we call it fairness. But it's not. It's just a mirror. One we keep polishing, mistaking our own reflection for justice. Imagine this. A child raised in chaos grows up swearing they'll never become their parents, swearing they'll never scream like that, never lash out, never turn love into a weapon. But one day they do, without thinking, without planning, just reactively. And afterward they wonder, how did this happen? Why did I become the very thing that hurt me? Because repetition is protection. The brain doesn't choose what's good for you. It chooses what's familiar, what's predictable. Even if it's toxic, even if it's harmful, even if it once nearly destroyed you. The brain doesn't crave healing. It craves patterns and pain. Repeated often enough becomes a blueprint. You learn to walk through fire and call it home. This is why abused children often enter abusive relationships, why the neglected chase emotional unavailability, why chaos feels comfortable. It's not self-destruction, it's neurological programming, a survival algorithm. You repeat what hurt you because it's the devil you know. Because if you can anticipate the pain, maybe you can control it. Maybe this time you'll do it right. Maybe this time love won't burn, but it always does. We mimic what wounded us, not because we're weak, but because we're wired. The mind says, this is what connection looks like, even if it came wrapped in violence. This is what love feels like, even if it left bruises. You internalize the message, not just emotionally, but biologically. And once your nervous system equates suffering with safety, healing starts to feel like a threat. Think about it. When someone treats you with respect, your stomach clenches. When they speak calmly, you brace for an explosion that never comes. When they say I love you without strings attached, you start looking for the trap. That's not intuition. That's trauma memory. That's your body mistaking peace for danger. Because in your history, peace was always temporary. So, instead of reaching for love, you sabotage it. Instead of setting boundaries, you apologize for existing. You recreate the conditions you once survived, not to punish yourself, but to make sense of the world. Your pain needs to feel logical. So you repeat it until it does. This isn't weakness. This is survival, dressed in self-destruction. And society rewards it. Think of how often pain gets mistaken for passion. How we romanticize jealousy, chaos, possession. We call it intensity. We call it soulmates. But often it's just two unhealed wounds dancing in circles, calling each other home. You're told to follow your heart. But what if your heart was wired by pain? What if love, for you, always had an undercurrent of fear? What if stability feels boring because you never learn to trust quiet? What if healthy love feels fake, like a trick, like something you didn't earn? And here's the catch. The more self-aware you become, the more exhausting it feels, because you still want the thing that hurt you. Still crave the familiar chaos. Still feel drawn to the pain, even as you understand its roots. Healing doesn't erase desire, it only adds shame to it. You know it's bad for you, but you want it anyway, because healing isn't a straight path. It's not a clean break. It's a war between your history and your potential. Between the child who learned to survive pain and the adult trying to unlearn it. Every time you choose differently, your body protests, your heart races, your palms sweat. You feel like you're dying, not because you are, but because your trauma is, and it fights back. That's the real cost of breaking the cycle. Not just resisting the past, but grieving it. Mourning the version of you that only knew survival, saying goodbye to what once felt like love, and standing in the terrifying space of the unknown, where healthy love isn't guaranteed, and pain at least made sense. So if you find yourself drawn to what once hurt you, don't hate yourself. Don't call it weakness. Call it programming. Call it history. Call it a nervous system that hasn't caught up with your wisdom yet. But don't stay there. Recognize the pull for what it is. A ghost. Familiar. Seductive. But no longer real. You are allowed to want better, even if you don't yet know how to receive it. Even if your body still flinches when someone says, "You're safe now," because you are. Or at least, you're learning to be. And every time you don't repeat what hurt you, you rewire that truth into your bones. You were programmed to suffer, but you were born to break it. Have you ever noticed how the sweetest words can sting the most? "Don't worry, I'm here to help. I just want what's best for you. You're so kind. It's why I trust you." They sound warm, safe. But peel back the tone, and something colder lurks underneath. Because sometimes kindness isn't care. Sometimes kindness is camouflage. Manipulators don't always come with snarls and threats. Often they arrive bearing smiles, because genuine kindness disarms you. It lowers your guard, slows your suspicion, and opens a doorway straight to your trust. But strategic kindness, that's a weapon, sharp, silent, and devastatingly effective. Imagine a con artist. He doesn't shove you, he compliments your taste, offers help, listens attentively. You don't feel coerced, you feel chosen, and that's the trick. Kindness works not by overpowering, but by inviting, by convincing you to step forward willingly into the trap. And once you're inside, the door closes quietly. This isn't just personal, it's systemic. Entire power structures are built on weaponized kindness. Governments hand out aid with strings. Corporations gift you free tools designed to mine your data. Institutions pat you on the head with support that subtly limits your autonomy. Every kind gesture comes with fine print. The genius of weaponized kindness is that it makes resistance feel wrong. When someone's nice to you, you're conditioned to reciprocate, to comply, to yield. Even when it doesn't feel quite right. Even when your gut twists. Because what kind of person rejects help? What kind of monster questions compassion? That's the psychological trap. You begin to gaslight yourself. Maybe you're being paranoid. Maybe they didn't mean harm. Maybe this is love. So you stay. You endure. You explain away red flags because they came wrapped in affection. Consider the abusive partner who showers you with gifts after each cruel word. The toxic boss who praises your dedication while exploiting your silence. The friend who offers emotional support, but only if you don't outshine them. In every case, kindness becomes a leash, not a balm. And the deeper danger. The kindness starts to change you. You begin to equate love with control, help with dependence, affection with guilt, and slowly, quietly, your boundaries erode. You stop questioning, you stop pushing back, because every act of rebellion now feels like betrayal. We've been trained to believe that kindness heals, but when weaponized, it doesn't heal, it sedates. It makes you docile, unsure, reluctant to challenge what feels good, even if it leads somewhere bad. Why does this work so well? Because your need to be liked, to be understood, to be nurtured, those needs are ancient. They're wired into your nervous system, and kindness lights them up like fireworks. You associate kindness with safety, and safety with survival. That's why this tactic works in war rooms and bedrooms alike. It's why propaganda begins with smiling children and soft music. Why authoritarian leaders kiss babies. Why cults start with community dinners, not sermons. Disarm, befriend, convert. What's chilling is how little force is needed when kindness does the job. You won't rebel against someone who only wants to help. You won't fight back if you feel cared for, even falsely. That's the genius of the strategy. Make you grateful for your own disempowerment. And eventually, you internalize the message. Maybe you deserve their version of kindness. Maybe your discomfort is your fault. Maybe asking for more is selfish. But here's the truth. Real kindness doesn't trap. It doesn't guilt, doesn't silence, doesn't twist itself into chains. Real kindness empowers. It gives you room to say no. It listens even when you disagree. It doesn't ask for loyalty. It earns respect. So how do you tell the difference? Watch what happens when you resist. Say no, set a boundary. Real kindness will respect it. Manipulators don't like losing control. Pay attention to the aftermath. Do you feel free, or do you feel indebted? Because kindness should never come with an invoice. The most dangerous people are not the ones who yell. They're the ones who whisper sweet things while holding a knife behind their back. And the most effective control isn't achieved through fear, but through comfort, through generosity, through a warmth that asks you to surrender everything, just a little bit at a time. So yes, kindness is powerful, but don't be fooled. It's not always here to heal. Sometimes it's just here to make sure you never fight back. Most people say they want freedom, but most people are lying, not because they're malicious, not because they're stupid, but because freedom is terrifying. Imagine waking up tomorrow with total freedom. No obligations, no expectations, no roadmap. What would you do? Where would you go? Who would you become? That sounds liberating, until it doesn't. Because with that freedom comes the unbearable weight of responsibility. No one to blame, no script to follow, just you, staring into the infinite. That's the real problem. Predictability, on the other hand, is safe. Predictability gives you a script, a structure, a schedule. It wraps your life in routine and tells you this is who you are. You don't have to think. You don't have to choose. You just have to follow. And people follow, not because they're forced, but because they're comforted. From childhood, you're trained to crave structure. Bells tell you when to move. Teachers tell you what to learn. Grades tell you how you're doing. Then jobs tell you when to show up, what to wear, how to behave. Predictability isn't just encouraged, it's engineered. You become fluent in compliance, skilled at following orders, and gradually you start confusing routine for identity. That's the trick. Freedom is chaos. It demands decision-making. It forces you to confront the unknown. And for most people, that confrontation is unbearable. Why else would people stay in jobs they hate? Relationships that drain them? Belief systems that no longer make sense? Because the devil, they know, feels safer than the freedom they don't. Predictability promises safety. Freedom demands risk. And safety always wins. But here's the disturbing part. This isn't just a psychological quirk. It's a tool of control. Systems don't need to cage you physically if they can cage your mind with predictability. You wake up, check your phone, scroll through identical feeds, go to work, clock in, clock out, go home, collapse, repeat. It's predictable. It's manageable. It's numbing. And numbing is exactly what control needs to survive. Governments, corporations, even social media platforms, none of them want you to be truly free. They want you comfortable, dependent, predictable. Because predictable people don't start revolutions. They don't ask dangerous questions. They don't seek truth. They consume, obey, and stay quiet. And that's by design. Even your desires are predictable, tailored by algorithms, targeted by ads, engineered by data. You think you're choosing, but your choices were predicted before you made them. You're not resisting the system, you're reinforcing it. Freedom means unpredictability. It means failure, chaos, rebellion. But rebellion is messy, chaos is painful, and failure is terrifying. So most people trade freedom for convenience. They don't want to steer the ship. They just want to know where it's going. They want maps, not oceans, roads, not forests, directions, not decisions. And the system is happy to oblige. Because a society that fears unpredictability is a society that governs itself. You don't need guards if everyone's afraid to leave. That's why true freedom is so rare. Not because it's hard to attain, but because it's hard to want, truly want, down to the core of your being. Because real freedom requires giving up the comfort of certainty. It means walking into the dark with no guarantee of light. And most people would rather stay in the glow of a flickering bulb than risk finding something better in the unknown. So next time someone says they want to be free, look closer. Do they really? Or do they just want the freedom to follow a different set of instructions? Because freedom is scary, predictability is safe. And when forced to choose between the two, most people choose the cage they know over the door they don't. You're walking down a busy street. Hundreds of people brush past you, talking, laughing, distracted. For a moment, you stop. You wonder if you disappeared right now, who would notice? Not eventually, not days or weeks later, when someone checks in. Right now, in this moment. Would anyone pause? Would anyone even remember your face? This isn't just existential dread. It's a terrifying possibility, buried under the noise of modern life, that you can be erased completely, and the world would keep turning without skipping a beat. We imagine our lives as indispensable threads in a vast social web. But most of those threads, they're illusions, manufactured connections maintained by proximity, convenience, or mutual utility. When those vanish, so do the ties, and so do you. Disappearing isn't just about death, it's about vanishing from relevance, becoming socially invisible. A ghost in plain sight. You've seen it happen. The co-worker who's suddenly gone after being laid off. The neighbor who stops showing up. Their house slowly going dark. Maybe you thought about them once or twice. Maybe you didn't, because their absence created no friction, no disruption. They simply ceased to exist in your daily reality. And that's the horror. Silence doesn't scream. It doesn't draw attention. It just fades. The system we live in is engineered to make this easy. Easy to forget. Easy to move on. Our cities are vast. Our routines are numbing. Our social rituals, likes, shares, texts, create the illusion of intimacy while hollowing out its substance. You can be connected to hundreds, even thousands, and still feel invisible, because no one's really seeing you. They're seeing a role, a username, a placeholder. The truth is, society is built to function without you. Brutally efficient. Interchangeable. You're not a person to the system. You're a unit. A consumer. A worker. A number. The moment you can't serve a purpose, the moment you don't produce or entertain or participate, you become surplus, disposable. And the most disturbing part, you'll likely help it happen. You'll rationalize your erasure, minimize your presence, apologize for taking up space, because you've been taught, subtly, relentlessly, that your worth is conditional, that you matter only if you perform, conform, comply. This idea doesn't just haunt the margins, it haunts everyone, even those with friends, family, followers, because deep down we know how conditional those relationships can be, how easily warmth turns to absence when we're no longer useful, when we're no longer easy to deal with. We lie to ourselves to cope. We tell ourselves we're loved unconditionally, that people care, that someone would notice. But when we're honest, painfully honest, we know how fragile those connections are. How many of them are built on sand, and it's not your fault. It's not a personal failure. It's by design. The system needs you isolated to control you, because someone who believes they're alone, someone who believes they can be erased without consequence, is easier to manipulate, easier to silence, easier to forget. The cruel trick is that this fear drives the very behaviors that reinforce it. You perform more, conform harder, desperately try to matter in a world that profits from your insecurity. So what do? How do you resist a system that thrives on your invisibility? You stop pretending, you stop chasing hollow recognition, and start demanding real presence, real community, real connection. You become visible, not by screaming, but by refusing to shrink, by speaking when it's inconvenient, by existing without apology. Being seen isn't about popularity, it's about truth. It's about showing up as yourself, even when that self is messy, inconvenient, or difficult. Because only then can you form bonds that can't be erased. That won't vanish the moment you stop performing. You are not a ghost, you are not a number, and you are not disposable. But until you believe that, until you demand that others see it too, you remain at risk. Because in a world engineered to forget you, the only defense is to refuse to disappear. You've heard the saying, honesty is the best policy. But in practice, in power structures, in human tribes, there's another rule at play. One far older, far more effective. One that decides who rises, who gets protected, and who vanishes into obscurity. It's not honesty, it's loyalty. Now picture this. You witness a crime, nothing subtle, a clear act of betrayal, corruption or cruelty committed by someone high up, someone well-loved, maybe even someone you care about. You know the truth, but the moment you speak it, everything changes. You're not just revealing facts, you're shattering allegiances. And in doing so, you've committed the real sin. You weren't disloyal because you lied. You were disloyal because you told the truth. In tight-knit groups, whether families, corporations, political parties, or entire nations, truth becomes dangerous when it threatens cohesion. Honesty isn't rewarded if it exposes flaws within the tribe. What is rewarded is silence, or better yet, defense, rationalization. A willingness to protect the image of the group, even if it means distorting reality. This is how systems preserve themselves. Loyalty becomes the currency of survival. Think of the whistleblower. They're often portrayed as heroes later, in documentaries, in memoirs. But in the moment they speak, what actually happens? They're exiled, discredited, painted as unstable, bitter, or vengeful. Not because they lied, but because they told a truth that made people uncomfortable. that fractured the illusion of unity. And here's the twist. Those who stay silent aren't just passive, they're celebrated, promoted, trusted. Because in systems built on fragile reputations, the loyal soldier, the one who protects the narrative, no matter how false, is always more valuable than the honest critic. This isn't limited to governments or corporations. It happens in everyday life. A friend admits something horrifying to you in confidence. A loved one mistreats someone else. You're torn. Do you expose the truth, even if it means betrayal? Or do you protect the person, the relationship, the peace by staying loyal? Over and over, we choose loyalty. Not because we're evil, but because truth feels explosive, while loyalty feels safe. Even in families, we're taught early on, don't air dirty laundry, keep the secrets, protect the name. Loyalty, even to dysfunction, becomes a sacred duty. But the deeper horror is this. Over time, repeated loyalty over honesty reshapes your mind. You begin to believe the lies you defend. You gaslight yourself, justifying the group's actions to maintain your sense of belonging. Cognitive dissonance becomes routine. The truth becomes whatever the tribe agrees to protect. It's psychological survival, because being honest in these conditions makes you a threat. It isolates you. It brands you as dangerous, not to morality, but to stability. That's why propaganda doesn't need to be convincing. It just needs to be repeated within loyal circles. Loyalty ensures the lie survives. Because the moment you believe your identity depends on the group, truth becomes negotiable. But it gets worse. Loyalty also protects the worst among us. Abusers, con artists, tyrants, they thrive not because people love them, but because people fear what will happen if they stop pretending to. Their power is rooted in the loyalty of those too afraid to admit what they see, too invested to walk away, too conditioned to prioritize the tribe over the truth. And when a truth teller arrives, someone who speaks openly, who refuses the script, they're labeled divisive, toxic, disloyal, not because they're wrong, but because they're disrupting the comfort of shared delusion. We pretend to value honesty. We teach it to children. We etch it in mottos. But in the real world, the person who lies for the group is celebrated. The person who tells the truth against it is sacrificed. So next time someone claims they want the truth, ask, do they? Or do they just want loyalty wrapped in moral language? Because in many places, honesty is a liability, and loyalty, even when it protects the worst kind of deceit, is mistaken for virtue. And maybe that's the darkest truth of all. We don't want truth. We want unity. Even if it means believing in beautiful lies, even if it means destroying the ones who dare to speak. Imagine waking up with a thought so precise, so deeply aligned with who you are, that you don't question it for a second. It feels like yours, organic, earned, inevitable. But what if that thought didn't come from you? What if it was planted, cultivated, disguised as your own voice echoing back at you? That's how propaganda really works. Not through force, not through fire, but through familiarity. You're not being brainwashed by slogans shouted in the street. You're being rewired by the whisper in your own head. The brilliance of propaganda isn't in its volume, it's in its invisibility. It doesn't announce itself as foreign. It masquerades as your intuition, your logic, your values. You see an ad, and you think you just want the product. You read a news headline, and it confirms what you already believe. You share a post, and it feels like conviction. But none of that was purely yours. It was curated, designed, fed to you in the exact dosage your psyche wouldn't reject. The best lies are the ones you tell yourself. The architects of propaganda understand this. They don't need to change your mind, they just need to make sure you never realize it's already been changed. Think about how beliefs are formed, not in moments of crisis, but through endless repetition. Through the stories you're told as a child, the values echoed in classrooms, the narratives reinforced by media, movies, religion, culture. Over time, these ideas sink below the surface, no longer visible but deeply rooted. You stop recognizing them as beliefs and start seeing them as reality. And when something feels like reality, you stop questioning it. This is the magic trick. When a lie is repeated often enough, it becomes indistinguishable from truth. And when you believe it came from within, you defend it like it's sacred. Have you ever argued fiercely about something only to later realize you had no idea where that opinion even came from? That's not rare, that's design. Propaganda isn't about pushing ideas, it's about pulling you into alignment with them, subtly, gradually, and most importantly, voluntarily. Because when you think the thought is yours, you'll never resist it. The modern world has refined this into an art form. You don't need a dictator or a regime to propagate ideology. You just need algorithms, attention, economies, personalized feeds. Your digital self is constantly being shaped, not by what's true, but by what keeps you engaged, what keeps you scrolling, what keeps you angry, afraid, or convinced. You're not fed information, you're fed validation. That's the hook. And every time you click, every time you like, every time you share, the system learns more about what to show you next. It isn't teaching you anything new. It's reinforcing what you already think, tightening the cage one bar at a time. Now imagine this happening at scale. Millions of people, each in their own echo chamber, all convinced they arrived at their beliefs independently. That's not education. That's orchestration. And the scariest part, it feels good. Propaganda that feels invasive is easy to reject. But propaganda that feels affirming is addictive. It flatters your intellect. It mirrors your morality. It rewards your instincts. And in doing so, it buries the origin. You stop asking, where did this idea come from? Because the answer feels obvious. It came from me. But what if it didn't? What if your beliefs are just echoes of someone else's intention? What if your convictions are borrowed? What if your inner voice is repeating a script that was handed to you? This isn't paranoia, it's probability. Because systems of power don't need you to believe everything. They just need you to believe that what you believe is entirely your own. That's the trap. Real thought, the kind that questions, that doubts, that wrestles with uncertainty, is uncomfortable. It's slow, it demands effort, and we're trained to avoid that discomfort. Why think critically when the system can think for you? Why reflect when you can react? Why investigate when you can scroll? And so the thought becomes habit. The habit becomes identity. And the identity becomes immovable. Suddenly, you're not just believing something, you are something. A patriot, a skeptic, a realist, a fighter for truth. But whose truth? Propaganda succeeds not by forcing conformity, but by seducing it. It lets you keep your voice, but it scripts your lines. And unless you trace every belief back to its root, unless you interrogate the origin of your convictions, you may never know whether you're free or just repeating what you were meant to think. Because the most dangerous propaganda doesn't sound like lies. It sounds like you. Imagine a world where morality was a fixed compass, unwavering, universal, immune to trends or temptation. Now look around. That world doesn't exist. Instead, what we have is something far more slippery, far more adaptable. Morality, your sense of right and wrong, shifts. And it doesn't shift according to truth. It shifts according to profit. Consider the morality of smoking. Not long ago, it was fashionable, sophisticated, even healthy, according to ads backed by billion-dollar tobacco companies. Today, it's public enemy number one. Not because people suddenly became more ethical, but because lawsuits, public health costs, and shifting markets made it financially unviable to defend. The ethics didn't change. The market did. Now think of slavery. Once defended by science, scripture, and law, economies were built on it. Generations were conditioned to believe it was not just acceptable, but natural. Only when the economics shifted, when industrialization made human bondage less profitable, did abolition become a moral imperative. Again, morality didn't lead the way. It followed the money. This is the disturbing truth. Morality is often just a mirror reflecting the values of the marketplace. We're taught that ethics are eternal, but history says otherwise. What's considered right often aligns eerily well with what's considered profitable. Look at how we treat animals. Dogs, family, pigs, bacon. One gets a birthday party, the other a bolt gun. Why? Because empathy costs and industry pays. Entire moral frameworks are erected, not around consistency, but convenience. We lie to ourselves to bridge the contradiction, because telling the truth would mean paying more, eating differently, living less comfortably. Technology reveals the same pattern. Data privacy, for instance. You're told your information is yours, sacred, private, but every time you scroll, click, or swipe, it's harvested, sold, and exploited. The moral panic around privacy only flares when profit is threatened, when consumers might flee or regulations might bite. Until then, exploitation is rebranded as innovation. Again, morality bends to market pressure. Even our views on drugs, on crime, on incarceration, how conveniently they track with economic incentives. A poor person with a bag of weed, criminal. A corporation selling synthetic opioids. Investor darling. One is punished, the other rewarded. And if public opinion shifts, it's rarely due to a sudden ethical awakening. It's because someone found a way to monetize empathy, to make reform profitable. It goes deeper still. Think of social movements, racial justice, gender equality, climate action. Vital causes, born from pain and necessity. Yet, as soon as they gain traction, corporations swoop in, rainbow washing, greenwashing, hashtag virtue signaling their way into your wallet. They don't change their practices, they change their branding, because morality, in their hands, is a marketing strategy. Nothing more. This isn't just about corporations or systems, it's about you. How your own values shift, often without realizing it. When you buy cheap clothes sewn in sweatshops. When you upgrade your phone made from cobalt mined by children. When you support companies whose ethics you'd never defend if they didn't make your life easier. You rationalize, you compartmentalize, you scroll past the guilt. Because facing it means inconvenience, cost, sacrifice. And the market knows this. It thrives on your need to feel moral while acting otherwise. It sells you carbon offsets, ethical labels, cruelty-free stickers, not to fix the problem, but to silence your conscience. Morality becomes a subscription service. As long as you pay, you get to feel like a good person. But deep down, you feel the dissonance. You know something's off. You sense that your morals are not your own, that they've been engineered, curated, sold back to you in sleek packaging. That what you believe is right might just be what was easiest to accept, what was safest, what was most profitable. So ask yourself, when was the last time your morality cost you something? Really cost you? If your ethics are never inconvenient, never uncomfortable, never in conflict with your comfort, are they really yours, or are they just the leftovers of a system that taught you how to feel righteous without ever challenging the market it serves? Because morality that never challenges power is not morality, it's obedience. And the market, it doesn't care what's right, it cares what sells. Imagine standing in a crowd where everyone is screaming the same thing, loud, certain, unified. And you notice something. A flaw in the logic, a contradiction in the cause. But the moment you try to speak, the air turns cold, faces turn, eyes narrow. Suddenly, you're not just wrong, you're dangerous. This is what it means to choose truth over righteousness. Righteousness isn't about being right. It's about being accepted. It's about aligning with the moral majority, even when that majority is marching off a cliff. Because being righteous, socially righteous, means safety. It means applause. It means you belong. But being correct, that's risky. It often means being alone. Righteousness feels good. It's wrapped in affirmation and moral clarity. It tells you you're one of the good ones, one of the enlightened. But truth rarely feels that clean. It's jagged, uncomfortable, sometimes even shameful. And worst of all, it doesn't guarantee applause. It often invites attack. We're wired for belonging. Evolution made it a survival mechanism. In tribal times, being cast out was a death sentence. So today, our brains still flinch at the thought of social rejection, which is why, when a belief gains enough momentum, people would rather be wrong together than risk being right alone. Think of the witch trials, the crowds chanting for death, the judges quoting scripture. Were they evil? Or were they just desperately trying to be righteous in a world that rewarded obedience over skepticism? History is filled with these moral panics, moments where being correct meant exile, prison, or worse. Galileo wasn't hailed for his discoveries, he was silenced, ostracized, because his truths clashed with the righteousness of his time, and righteousness, once established, doesn't welcome challenge. It crushes it. But it's not just history. Look around. Our age is no different, only more subtle. Online mobs, viral outrage, the rush to condemn without nuance. We don't seek understanding, we seek alignment. Likes, retweets, public agreement. A shared sense of outrage becomes its own morality, and to question it, even gently, is seen as betrayal. And it's not because people are stupid, it's because they're scared. Afraid of losing social capital, afraid of standing out, afraid that being correct isn't worth the cost of being cast out. That's the irony. In the pursuit of morality, we abandon truth. We trade precision for passion, doubt for certainty, and we reward those who speak loudest, not those who speak most accurately. But here's the thing. Correctness is lonely, but it's not hollow. It doesn't offer instant gratification, but it offers something deeper, integrity. When you choose truth, you don't get applause. You get clarity. You get to look at yourself without flinching. You get the quiet, steady power of knowing you didn't bend just to fit in. And maybe that's the only kind of righteousness that matters. Because what good is being praised if it's for believing a lie? What's the value of being good if that goodness is just conformity wrapped in moral language? People would rather be righteous than correct because righteousness protects their identity. It protects their relationships, their status, their sense of self-worth. But at what cost? What happens when the foundation of your righteousness starts to crack? When the truth finally breaks through the illusion? You can ignore it, deny it, shame those who speak it, or you can face it. The uncomfortable truth is that being correct often means being first. First to notice, first to question, first to be hated. But eventually, the world catches up. It always does. And when it does, the ones who stood firm, who chose truth over comfort, are no longer seen as threats. They're seen as prophets. But that recognition rarely comes in time to shield them from the pain. So the next time you feel that pull, that itch to join the crowd, to shout the slogan, to condemn without thinking, ask yourself, do I believe this because it's true or because it's popular? Because history remembers the thinkers who were correct, not the ones who were righteous. And your life, your legacy, will be shaped by the difference. Have you ever wondered why we play along? Why we get up, go to work, follow the rules, and nod politely at a system that often fails us? Not because we trust it, not because we believe it's just, but because deep down we fear what happens if we stop. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet anxiety when you think about stepping outside the norm, the fear of falling behind, of being cast out, of chaos erupting. The system doesn't hold together because it works. It holds together because we're terrified of what lies on the other side. You could call it survival instinct. You could call it pragmatism. But what it really is fear. You fear losing your job because rent doesn't wait. You fear challenging authority because authority has teeth. You fear asking questions because questions unravel the illusion, and illusions are all that keep you sane. We like to think we're rational, autonomous beings. But most of our choices aren't about what we truly want. They're about what we're afraid to lose. Safety, stability, acceptance. And so we become complicit. We sit in traffic for hours. We tolerate jobs that drain our soul. We nod through small talk, choke down dissatisfaction, and scroll endlessly, numbing ourselves with curated happiness. Not because we believe this is the best we can do, but because imagining the alternative is too overwhelming. The system is a story, and every day you wake up and live it. You help write another chapter. Even when it treats you like a number, even when it asks for more than it gives, even when it contradicts everything you know in your gut, to be fair, you keep feeding it. Not because you want to, but because you're scared of what would happen if you didn't. What if no one showed up to work tomorrow? What if we stopped pretending money is real? What if laws stopped being respected simply because they existed? The truth is, the system is fragile. It only survives because we keep acting like it's not. But fragile doesn't mean harmless. Fragile systems crack in chaos. And so we don't test them. We preserve them, not out of belief, but out of dread. Out of the paralyzing awareness that if we stop playing the game, everything collapses, including us. You tell yourself you're doing the right thing, that you're being responsible, but the deeper truth is harder to admit. You're doing what you must, because the unknown is worse. You've seen what happens to those who reject the system. They're ridiculed, isolated, erased. They become cautionary tales whispered behind closed doors. Not because they were wrong, but because they remind us what we're afraid to become. Fear becomes the glue that binds us. Not love, not trust, not justice. Just the constant whisper that it could always get worse. And maybe that's the most effective control of all. Not brute force, not surveillance, but the silent fear that without the system, there's nothing left. That without the cage, we wouldn't know how to breathe. So we stay. We adapt. We conform. We convince ourselves that this is normal, that this is necessary. Because believing in the system, even when it hurts, is easier than facing the void it hides. But here's the final twist. The system doesn't save you from chaos. It just delays it. It feeds off your fear, stretches your hope, and bets on your compliance. But when it finally breaks, and it always does, it won't ask if you believed in it. It will simply leave you where you are, empty, used up, and still afraid. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most terrifying truth of all. Imagine this. A child spills a drink at dinner. Two responses. One a slap, the other a look of disappointment and silence, which leaves a deeper scar. Violence is visceral. It erupts, shocks, bruises, but shame seeps in. It wraps itself around your identity and whispers, "You are not enough." Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. Shame doesn't need blood to control. It works in silence, in glances, in withheld approval. And that's what makes it more powerful than violence. Violence provokes resistance. Shame breeds submission. From a young age, you're trained to respond to shame. The disapproving teacher, the disappointed parent, the public correction that makes your face flush. These moments don't just teach behavior, they shape identity. You begin to internalize the voice of shame, turning it into your own. Eventually, there's no need for anyone to punish you. You'll do it yourself, over and over again. Because shame isn't about the action, it's about the self. Shame tells you that being wrong means being unworthy, and so you adapt. You learn to hide the parts of yourself that provoke shame. You silence your desires. You deny your impulses. You self-edit until what's left is palatable, acceptable, controlled. This is why shame is so effective. It doesn't require surveillance or force. It only needs your cooperation. And once you believe that your value is conditional on obedience, performance, acceptance, you become the perfect subject. Cultures are built on this. Shame is baked into morality, religion, education, even love. You're not just told what is right or wrong. You're made to feel that doing wrong makes you unlovable, that dissent makes you defective. So you conform, you repress, you become ashamed, not just of mistakes, but of thoughts, of instincts, of truths that don't fit the mold. And the system smiles. Because control doesn't need chains when shame does the job better. Shame polices you when no one else is watching. It rewrites your memory, makes you doubt yourself, question your worth. And unlike violence, which invites empathy from others, shame isolates. You believe your failure is unique, that if anyone saw the truth of you, they'd turn away. But here's the most disturbing part. Shame doesn't just silence the guilty, it silences the innocent. The survivors feel ashamed, victims feel ashamed. The powerless carry shame that should belong to those in power. And the institutions that benefit from this, they do nothing, because a population paralyzed by shame will never organize, never resist. They'll stay quiet, they'll stay small. This is why shame is more dangerous than violence. Violence leaves visible wounds. Shame hides in the soul. It teaches you that to speak is to risk exposure, that to be authentic is to be rejected, that love is something you earn by being perfect, obedient, invisible. It's why people stay in toxic jobs, abusive relationships, oppressive communities. Not because they can't leave, but because shame tells them they don't deserve better. And over time, you stop needing others to shame you. You'll do it all by yourself. You'll become the warden of your own prison. That's the brilliance of shame. It delegates control. It turns you against yourself. So when someone says violence is the ultimate tool of power, they're wrong. Violence may conquer land, but shame conquers minds. And once your mind is colonized by shame, your body will follow. The only way to escape it, see it for what it is, not a reflection of your worth, but a strategy, a manipulation, a lie dressed up as virtue. Because the moment you stop believing that your imperfections make you unworthy, the control begins to crack. And you remember shame was never about truth. It was about obedience. and you were never broken, just brainwashed. Have you ever wondered why change scares you, even when your life is in ruins? You could be drowning in anxiety, suffocated by routine, or quietly desperate for something different. And yet, the moment real change appears, you freeze, you hesitate. You run. That reaction isn't just fear. It's programming. From the moment you're born, you're taught to fear disruption. You're taught that consistency equals safety, that the known, no matter how painful, is better than the unknown. Even when everything is falling apart, you cling to the pieces. Because change, real change, feels like death. And in a way, it is. Change is the death of identity. The version of you who survives change is not the one who existed before it. That's why it feels terrifying. Because change forces a confrontation with self, an ego death that no one prepares you for. But ask yourself this: who benefits from your fear of transformation? Comfort does, stability does, the system does. A system built on predictability thrives when you stay the same. If you keep playing the same role, repeating the same patterns, buying the same distractions, it stays intact. Your fear of change isn't a flaw, it's a feature, carefully installed by a culture obsessed with order. You're sold the fantasy that happiness lives in permanence. Marry once, choose one career, find your forever home. The illusion is seductive, but it's also a cage, because when those things no longer serve you, when they start to choke rather than support, you're left without permission to evolve. Instead, you're told to adjust, to compromise, to settle. But real change is rebellion. It breaks the rules, it burns the script. And that kind of transformation is dangerous to power, to predictability, to the mechanisms that profit from your stagnation. Ever notice how society celebrates change, but only in hindsight? The revolutionary is dangerous until they're dead. The entrepreneur is reckless until they succeed. The person who leaves the toxic marriage, the soul-crushing job, the expected path, they're called selfish, irresponsible, unstable, until maybe years later they're admired. Why? Because we fear what we can't control. And change is uncontrollable. It doesn't ask permission. It demands sacrifice. It threatens the illusion that everything can be kept tidy and contained. But here's the truth: change is not the enemy. Denial is. When you suppress your need for transformation, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It manifests as anxiety, resentment, apathy. The soul doesn't stay silent. It whispers, then screams. And if you don't listen, it breaks you. Sometimes, breakdown is the only doorway to breakthrough. Yet still, you hesitate. You wait for a sign, for permission, for the perfect time. But there is no perfect time. Change is never neat. It doesn't arrive gift-wrapped. It arrives in chaos, in endings, in discomfort. And that's exactly where its power lies. Because change doesn't just alter your circumstances, it alters your mind. It teaches you that you can survive the loss, that you can endure the unknown, that you are more than the roles you've played, the masks you've worn, the lies you've told yourself to stay safe. And that's terrifying, to realize you've been holding the key to your own prison this entire time. So ask yourself, what part of your life is demanding change right now? What truth are you avoiding because it would force you to act? What dream have you silenced because pursuing it might dismantle everything you've built? That fear, that panic, that's the sign. Because growth always feels like destruction at first. We're taught to fear change because it threatens control, predictability, the illusion of permanence. But without change, there's no evolution, no freedom, no truth. So when the moment comes, and it will, don't run, don't numb, don't retreat into the comfort of your own suffering. Step into the fire. Let it burn away everything that no longer fits. Let it make you raw and real and ready. Because on the other side of fear is something the system never wanted you to find yourself. Imagine standing at the edge of a board game you never agreed to play. The rules are already written. The dice are weighted. The players at the top aren't necessarily smarter, braver, or more talented. They just got here first. Or better yet, they were born already winning. This isn't a metaphor. It's the structure you're living inside. The game is success. And success, as it turns out, has very little to do with brilliance or creativity or even effort. It's about one thing, more than anything else: endurance. Not the kind that fuels marathon runners or adventurers scaling Everest. No, this is a quieter, crueler form of endurance. It's the ability to keep going in a game designed to break you. You see it everywhere. The intern putting in 80-hour weeks for a shot at a future that may never arrive. The artist sacrificing mental health for exposure. The single parent working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. These people aren't losing because they lack skill or ambition. They're playing in a rigged arena, one where talent is irrelevant, and endurance becomes your only weapon. But here's the trick. The game doesn't reward fair play. It rewards survival. Survive the endless grind of unpaid labor. And maybe someone finally gives you a foot in the door. Survive the crushing debt of higher education. And maybe you land a job that pays you just enough to keep you dependent. Survive long enough in a broken system. And suddenly people start calling you successful. Not because you won, but because you didn't quit. This is how the illusion is maintained. We're taught to admire resilience, to celebrate those who never gave up, but we don't talk about what that actually means. We don't talk about the trauma they carried, the self-betrayals they endured, or the integrity they were forced to compromise. We don't talk about what they had to become, just to survive. And survival in this game means swallowing your pride. It means watching less capable people rise above you because they know someone or because they had the money to bypass the line. It means watching your dreams rust while others cruise through green lights you weren't even allowed to see. But still, you stay, you endure. Because stepping away feels like failure. Quitting is punished harder than suffering. And that's the cruelest part of the game. It convinces you that giving up is weakness, not wisdom. That breaking down is personal failure, not the predictable result of systemic pressure. You start to internalize it. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe I don't want it badly enough. Maybe if I just push a little harder. You become your own jailer. You enforce the rules that punish you. But what if endurance isn't just a virtue? What if it's a trap? The system needs you exhausted. It needs you compliant. It needs you so focused on surviving that you never look up long enough to ask who built the damn game in the first place. And when you finally succeed, when you finally claw your way to the top, you might realize something terrifying. It wasn't worth it. Because endurance doesn't just test your limits. It rewrites them. It teaches you to settle, to tolerate, to accept less than you deserve. It trains you to think that surviving is the same as thriving. It's not. Endurance doesn't always mean strength. Sometimes it just means you've been suffering for so long, you forgot how not to. So if you're looking at someone you consider successful, ask a different question. Not how smart they are or how talented, but what did they endure? What did they put up with? What did they lose along the way? And if you're stuck in the middle, feeling like you're failing just because you're exhausted, know this: you're not broken. The game is. And the only thing more radical than enduring it is realizing you were never supposed to win by their rules in the first place. You're not remembering your life. You're rewriting it. Every time you reach into your mind to replay a memory, you aren't pulling out a static, preserved recording. You're extracting a living, breathing reconstruction, an echo that shifts just a little each time you summon it. The lighting changes. The tone of voice softens, a detail disappears, and another takes its place. You aren't just remembering, you're editing. The mind doesn't store memories like files on a hard drive. It regenerates them, reassembles fragments into coherent stories based on your current mood, beliefs, and needs. That argument from 10 years ago, it feels less cruel now, maybe even justified. That one heartbreak, it starts to blur, soften, feel like fiction. Each time you revisit a moment, you rewrite the script, tweaking, twisting, embellishing, erasing, because raw memory is unstable, memory is vulnerable, and most disturbingly, it's manipulable. Consider this: two people can remember the exact same event and walk away with entirely different stories. Not because one is lying, but because their brains sculpted different truths. Truths tailored to preserve identity, protect pride, avoid guilt. You remember what fits your narrative, and unconsciously, you discard what doesn't. This is why trauma lingers in fragments, sharp flashes, distorted timelines, missing details. The mind resists truth when it threatens the self. Pain that can't be processed gets scrambled, sanitized, hidden behind false smiles and false memories. You remember what you can survive. The rest gets buried, bent, or blurred. Even joy isn't immune. Think about that childhood vacation, that birthday party, that perfect summer. Are you remembering the event, or the story you've told yourself about it a dozen times since? Each retelling becomes a revision. Each nostalgic sigh adds another coat of paint over the original canvas. Eventually, the memory you cherish might not even be real. It's a dream stitched together from fragments and fantasy. This is not a flaw, it's a feature. Your brain edits reality because unfiltered truth is unbearable. It overwhelms. It paralyzes. So memory becomes selective, adaptive. It protects you from drowning in past pain. But that protection comes at a cost. Over time, you become less tethered to reality and more aligned with a curated mythology about yourself. The person you think you were. That's an illusion, not entirely false, just rehearsed, refined. And the deeper problem, this edited past becomes the foundation for future decisions. You believe you've learned from experience, but what if the experience you remember never truly happened the way you believe it did? You trust your intuition, your instincts, your lessons learned, but what if they're built on a scaffolding of revision and self-deception? Reality starts to crumble quietly. You don't notice. You're still functioning, smiling, talking about the past like it's a solid thing. But deep inside, the edits compound. The truth becomes unreachable, not because it's gone, but because you've rewritten it too many times to tell the difference. It gets worse. You're not the only one editing your memories. The world helps. Culture, media, politics, they all feed you cues about what to remember and how to remember it. Propaganda doesn't just shape opinion, it reshapes history, rewrites national trauma, recasts villains as heroes and heroes as threats. You absorb these revisions. They seep into your personal memories, coloring them subtly, invisibly. What you remember as pride might be shame. What you recall as innocence might be complicity. And no one will correct you, because they're editing too. Collective memory is just as fragile. Societies forget inconvenient truths, erase entire histories, build myths to replace uncomfortable realities. And those myths become facts, taught, accepted, defended. So ask yourself, what do you actually remember? And what have you simply rehearsed so many times that you stopped questioning? Memory isn't a mirror, it's a canvas, and you are the painter. But every time you add a new stroke, the original fades just a little more, until eventually the truth is gone. Not because someone stole it, but because you quietly, unknowingly, chose to let it go. You don't need an external force to rewrite your past. You do it to yourself, because it's easier, safer, cleaner. But in that safety lies a trap. You can't grow from a history that never happened. You can't heal from a lie. And if your past is fiction, what hope does your future have? Memory feels sacred, it feels personal. But in reality, it's porous, fallible, disturbingly fluid. And maybe, just maybe, that means you don't really know who you are. You only know the version of yourself you've remembered, and re-remembered, and edited into something you can live with. You see a headline, a disaster, a tragedy, a war. You feel a twinge, something between sadness and discomfort. You read the caption, maybe even click on the article. You sigh, you shake your head, and then you scroll. You go back to your life, your coffee, your playlist. And in that moment, you feel just a bit better. You did your part, right? You cared, but did you? Caring isn't what it used to be. Once to care meant action. Now it means attention. Brief, fragmented attention. A glance, a share, maybe a donation. We've learned to simulate concern because real compassion is exhausting. Real compassion is costly. So we imitate it, not to help, but to cope. To feel like we're good people, even when we're doing nothing at all. It's not because we're monsters, it's because we're afraid. Real caring demands confrontation. It demands seeing the world as it is, unfiltered, unfixable, unjust. It means acknowledging how little we're actually doing, and worse, how much more we could be doing if we really wanted to. That guilt, that quiet ache, we soothe it with gestures, a post, a like, a tear. We tell ourselves it matters, that awareness is enough, that caring in our hearts counts for something. But deep down, we know this is performance. Not for the victims, but for ourselves. Because to really care is to suffer. Real caring doesn't end when you close the app. It lingers. It infects your thoughts. It changes your habits. It costs you time, comfort, money, sometimes even relationships. That kind of caring isolates you. It puts you in conflict with the world around you. It makes you inconvenient. So instead, we pretend. We build a ritual around tragedy. We perform empathy with just enough sincerity to be believable, but not enough to disrupt our lives. We learn the right language, the right symbols, the right hashtags. We build an identity out of curated concern. And the most chilling part, it works. It makes us feel better. It shields us from guilt, from shame, from the unbearable weight of our own inaction. And the system, it loves this because pretending to care keeps the wheels turning. You keep consuming, you keep scrolling, you keep believing you're one of the good ones. But the truth, the system doesn't fear your pity. It fears your disruption. It fears what happens when guilt turns into action, when comfort gives way to responsibility. But don't worry, the system's safe. You've been trained well. You've been taught that seeing suffering is the same as fighting it. That saying "I care" is the same as showing up. You've been given emotional shortcuts, psychological exits, 1,000 tiny lies to help you sleep at night. You didn't build this coping mechanism. You inherited it. Because somewhere along the line, we decided it's better to be guilt-free than to be good. And it goes deeper. You don't just pretend to care about others. You pretend to care about yourself, your health, your dreams, your peace of mind. You tell yourself you'll change, that you'll slow down, that you'll finally do what matters. But the mirror is merciless. You don't act. You soothe. You manage guilt with intentions. You mistake planning for progress. You fake it so you can avoid facing it. And here's the darkest part. This performance of caring isn't just individual, it's institutional. Corporations care, brands stand with you, governments express concern. But it's all theatre. Scripts written by PR teams designed to mimic morality without ever delivering justice. And we buy it, because it feels like caring. And that feeling is all we really want. Real caring is dangerous. It demands risk. It disrupts dinner conversations. It gets you unfollowed, uninvited, undone. It burns through the easy comfort of apathy and asks something harder. Who are you really when no one is watching? You say you care. Maybe you even believe it. But ask yourself this. What has your caring cost you? Because if the answer is nothing, then maybe you're not really caring. Maybe you're just pretending, so you can live with yourself. And maybe that's the problem. Not that we don't care, but that we've found a way to feel like we do, without ever having to prove it.